Greetings, humans. You have entered the Command Zone, your destination for all aspects of Elder Dragon Highlander. Enjoy your stay.
Painted Black by the Rolling Stones. Okay, good enough. What's up, everybody? You're watching/listening to the Command Zone podcast. I'm your host, Jimmy Wong.
How's it? It's Josh Lee Kwai. Get it? Paint, draw.
Draw. They may not even have read the episode title yet.
Who, the Rolling Stones?
No, well, yeah, the audience and the Rolling Stones. Okay.
We're just waiting for Mick Jagger to read the title.
I think it was one of their birthdays recently. I think it was Mick's birthday recently. Anyway,
today... What is he, like 94 now?
He's actually 8,000 years old. How's it going? Today we are doing the complete guide to card draw, our favorite thing in the format, in Magic in general. Josh has been fleshing this one out, and as you guys can see, this is a 6-page outline. That's a lot.
That's a big outline. Yes, we're talking about our favorite thing, card draw. This seems like a really simple topic on the surface, and then as we start to delve into it, it turns out that there are many forms of that card draw can take.
Yes.
And so sort of understanding the difference between each one will, I think, help people decide which effects are like perfect for your deck and which ones might be suboptimal or subpar. So there's a lot. There's a lot of meat on the bone here, a lot to talk about. But before we get into all that, we need to talk about our sponsors. CardKingdom.com/CommandZone. That is our affiliate link. And if you want to buy Magic products, Magic singles, we're going to talk about a lot of card draw cards. And of all the cards in Magic that you want to get your hands on, the ones that draw you more cards are at the top of my personal list. And I would always go to CardKingdom.com/CommandZone to order those cards because, for one, you know they're going to come and be in the best possible condition according to how you ordered them.
Yep.
And for two, they're going to get there faster than anybody else would send them. Card Kingdom is just famous in the community for getting you your stuff super, super quick. So if you want to get that card and have it in time, you know, a lot of people playing over webcam these days for the next time that your group meets, well, CardKingdom.com/CommandZone is the way to go.
And our other sponsor for the show, UltraPro, because when you draw that card, you want to draw it across the nicest playmat ever, where you flick it into your hand.
You don't want to stick to your other sleeves and
You want to slap it down on your playmat. You want them in the best sleeves possible. UltraPro has been sponsoring this show for quite a while. We are, of course, big fans of the product they make. We trust them to keep our cards safe, as well as those very important card draw spells. Because look, if you're going to be drawing a lot of cards, you're going to be using those sleeves a lot. You're going to be shuffling a lot. So make sure that you put them into Eclipse sleeves or use the Satin Tower deck boxes. Prof was just on the episode, and he said that was one of his single favorite products in Magic because
of all
price
time.
Point. Yeah, great price point, extremely durable, and great to carry your cards everywhere. So big thanks to UltraPro. If you pick up UltraPro product from CardKingdom.com/CommandZone or your big box retailer, or you support your local LGS, you're also supporting our show.
And the final way to support all of our content is directly if you go to patreon.com/CommandZone. You can contribute to all of our content and also get all kinds of perks. Like, for instance, Jimmy and I hang out on our Discord each and every day. You can chat with us. You get to see game nights and extra turns day earlier than the general public.
And we shout out one lucky patron every single week. And this week's episode is dedicated
to Allison Wilcox. Allison, you rock.
Thank you, Allison.
All right, let's go on to our main topic here. A complete guide to card draw.
The complete guide, it's the one.
It is it.
Until we do this again.
All right, so we always say you want at least 10 ramp spells and 10 card draw spells in every single commander deck. But what does that even mean? You know, we get asked all the time, well, I'm thinking of putting this card in my deck. Does that qualify or count as card draw? So I thought the first step we would want to do is just try to define what card draw is. And this is where we actually run into our first problems because it is a little bit difficult, as it turns out, to define what is card draw.
Yeah, I think the base minimum of what card draw is card from your library going into your hand.
Right. And even that is a little bit controversial because, Jimmy, would you count a cantrip as a card draw card?
Uh-huh.
So a card that just said, you know, let's just make up a card that just said pay 1 mana, sorcery, draw a card.
Right.
Is that card draw?
You are drawing a card, but I think in terms of what we need to talk about is whether or not you're going to actually be up a card or down a card. Because in this case, a cantrip is famous because all you do is use a card to draw a card. So you're kind of replacing that card.
Yeah, so you don't actually have more cards in your hand when that's done. And I think that is one of the components when we talk about 10 card draw spells that go in decks that we're talking about. You want cards that are going to gain you cards. You're going to have more cards when it's over than when you started. And so the classic example is Divination, that we're going to probably refer to over and over again in this episode as sort of a benchmark. Not that it's a good card, but it's just clearly a card draw card. So it's 2 and a blue, 3 mana total for a sorcery, and it says draw 2 cards.
Right.
So at the end of that, you've used 1 card, but you've drawn 2, so you're up a card. So I think card draw involves some form of card advantage, being up cards, like you said.
Yeah, so I think this is the one question that always people ask, which is like, is this card draw? Well, it's like, well, look at the number of cards in your hand. After you cast Divination, you'll go from, let's say, 5 cards to 4, but then you'll go up to 6. So 6 is greater than 5. You have drawn a card in a way that defines it as card advantage. So being up a card, having more cards than you were before. And especially, I think this is something that is going to be, again, controversial, is making sure that you're up cards compared to your opponents.
That's interesting.
In a multiplayer game, like, your card draw is actually a little worse because everyone gets to draw cards, and by the time it gets back to you, you're going to have 3 players that have all drawn the minimum of 1 card on their turn. So your card draw needs to actually kind of be compared to that if you want to talk about real card advantage. But if it's just you playing a solo game, you drawing a card, having more cards in your hand than when you played the card, you have drawn cards. You have card advantage, and you're up a card. Okay,
let's put card advantage on a shelf for just a second and pause to talk about looting, rummaging, cantrips, and cycling. These are all similar. Cantrip is what we talked about, 1 mana card that just said, a sorcery that said draw a card. Looting is when you draw a card and then you have to discard a card, or when you draw 2 cards and have to discard 2 cards.
Right.
If you're discarding the same amount as you drew, that's looting. Rummaging is discarding first and then drawing. So rummaging would say discard a card, then draw a card, or discard 2 cards, then draw 2 cards. Those are both not card advantage, right? You end up with the same amount of cards.
And sometimes less, depending on the card that lets you rummage.
Right. And then cycling is similar, where you cantrip the card, basically. If a card has cycling on it, then you pay the cycling cost, you put that card into your graveyard, and then you draw a card. Mm-hmm. Similar to rummaging, except for that you're... or I guess similar to cantrips too, in that you're discarding a specific card, the card with cycling. Normally, we would not count these as card advantage, right?
Yeah.
As card draw.
I would say card filtering is a more accurate term, or just like you get to look at more of your deck, but it does not mean that you're necessarily up cards.
Yeah, I wouldn't call them card draw on the deck. Not that they're not good, right? I think that's something we're going to run into repeatedly in this episode when we're like defining things and is it card draw or is it not? There's a tendency to say, yeah, but it's good in this sense. We're not saying good or bad. What we're saying is it card draw or is it not? And I think that in general, looting, rummaging, cycling, cantrips are not card draw. Not that there's not corner cases where they are, and we'll talk about those at some point.
A lot of corner cases.
Yeah. But in general, in the average deck, those aren't. Now, let's talk about card draw. Let's bring that down off the shelf here, because I think that let's talk about card advantage. Yeah, card advantage is related to card draw, like we said. What is card advantage, Jimmy, and how is it different than card draw?
Card advantage can be applied to a lot of things. So typically when we talk about card draw and it's card advantage, it's like divination. You played 1 card, you drew 2, you're up a card, you're at an advantage, or however you want to describe it. But there are a lot of ways to have card advantage. Let's say someone goes to target their creature with a giant growth and you remove it in response. Now they've used 2 cards and you've only used 1 card. That is also card advantage. So that's something that can
But you didn't draw any cards.
You didn't draw any cards, right?
Yeah.
So card advantage can live outside of card draw, but card draw can also be card advantage. You can see how this is going to get very complicated very quickly.
Yeah, so a good example is like Curtain's Call or Grasp of Fate, these removal spells that remove multiple things. Decimate. Mm-hmm. You use 1 single card, but you get rid of 3 or 4 cards on the board. Those are card advantage cards, but they're not card draw cards. So just keep those terms separate. And again, we've already messed them up when talking about them. We'll try and be a little clear here. Another thing to talk about here when we talked about looting and rummaging is another type of sort of... Well, let's talk about card selection, I guess. So card selection is related to this as well and can be confused. It's kind of like what fixing is to ramp. I think card selection is to card draw.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So card selection is again going to be a situation where you're not up cards when it's over, but what you've done is you've been able to sort of set the quality of the cards that you have, or look at different cards than you had before. So you maybe still have 5 cards in your hand at the end of it, but there are different 5 cards or a better 5 cards.
Yeah, and also mechanics like scry, I think, are the easiest way to think about card selection, where you get to look at cards, not necessarily draw them, but decide, okay, do I want them in my hand next turn, or whenever I draw them, do I want to put them on the bottom of the library? And that, a lot of people will say that, if you scry enough times, you have quote unquote drawn a card.
Right. We equate it to card advantage, because if you didn't want certain cards and you're able to get rid of them and draw something you did want, that is better than if you hadn't done that, right, and drew the crappy cards twice and then the good card,
right?
Because that's 2 cards you didn't want that you're now not drawing. So let's talk about some card selection cards.
Yeah, one of them I haven't actually seen in a long time is one that it can potentially go through your entire library for card selection. It's Limdol's Vault. It's a card that you get to look at the top 5 cards of your library for blue and black as an instant, and as many times as you choose, you may pay 1 life, put those cards on the bottom of your library in any order, then look at the next top 5 cards of your library, then shuffle your library and put the last cards you looked at this way on top of it in any order. So it's this weird thing where you get look at 5 cards, being like, I don't like it, put it at the bottom. Look at the next 5, pay a life, don't like it, until you find the 5 you want, shuffle the rest of your deck and put those on top.
And you get to put those 5 that you like in any order too.
Yes.
So you can determine, like, I'm going to draw this one next, then this one, or whatever.
Yeah, great for a lot of the decks that want things off the top of their library, like the Yenets or the Narsets of the world. Jalevas, yeah.
It's annoying because it can take a long, long time for the person to figure out,
yeah.
do I want this, or do I want to roll the dice and look at the next 5? But it doesn't draw you any cards itself. Limdol's Vault doesn't say draw a card anywhere on there. You just look at cards and then you rearrange cards, and it just gives you card selection for future turns.
Yeah, and you go over and over again until you find your quote-unquote perfect 5.
Crystal Ball is one that you used to see a lot, and again, I don't see it as much anymore, but it's 3 mana for an artifact. You can pay 1 and tap it and scry 2. So like you said, scrying, which is you look at, in this case, 2 cards on the top of your library, and then you can either put those cards back on top in any order, or you can put 1 or both on the bottom of your library. So you get to decide if you're drawing those cards in what order.
Yep, and one of the most famous and still commonly used card selection cards would be Sensei's Divining Top, which has a card draw, quote-unquote, card draw element to it, but it's an artifact that costs 1, and you can pay 1 to look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put them back in any order. And alternatively, you can also tap the Sensei's Divining Top to draw a card, and then you put the top on your top of its owner's library. So this isn't card draw. This is basically replacing itself. You paid a card,
like a cantrip.
You tapped it. Yeah, it's kind of like a cantrip, except it goes to your library instead of your hand. The graveyard. So this is a very important card selection card, and as Josh wrote down here, it's very good when you can combine this kind of card with a fetch land. Because let's say you look at the top 3 cards, you don't like any of them, or you only want to draw 1, you draw it and you have a fetch land, you can now shuffle away those other cards, get a fresh new 3 on top, and you have even more options for card selection.
Right, so card selection is good. We're not saying card selection is necessarily bad or anything, but Sensei's Divining Top by itself, without other synergies, is not a card draw card.
No.
Yeah. All right.
Card draw. It smooths out your draws, though.
Yeah. Okay, so looting, rummaging, Sensei's Divining Top, they're not bad. Curtain's Call is not bad just because they're not card draw. We're just not defining them as card draw. Note number 2 is there's going to be some gray area here, so keep in mind as we continue in this discussion that there's going to be all kinds of things in your head as you're listening to this. So like, well, in this deck, that is that.
Yeah, but what about this?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Corner cases, I would count, X or Y as card draw in this specific situation. We're going to be discussing most of this stuff as if it were in the average deck in the average scenario.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about the different types of card draw. And it turns out as we went through this, there's many different kinds of things that we would define as card draw when building our deck.
And we're not just talking instant sorcerer creature enchantment.
No, yeah. So the first type of card draw we're going to talk about here is repeatable card draw. This is card draw that's going to happen more or less on a consistent basis that you can have happen multiple times. So think of that divination we talked about earlier. That's 2 and a blue. Sorcery, draw 2 cards. Once you cast it, it's over.
It's all over.
Whereas these cards we're going to talk about in the repeatable section are ones where once you cast it, it's going to continue to pay dividends over time. So The first one is one of the classics in the format.
Phyrexian Arena, the most repeatable black card draw I think out there that does not kill you immediately.
It eventually can, though.
Yeah, slowly but surely. But this is one of those ways that you can get 2 cards a turn, basically. So it's 1 black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card and you lose a life.
So, yep, every single turn you're going to draw an extra card basically at the cost of 1 life, which is, can be powerful. The Immortal Sun is a card we've seen more and more recently. It's 6 mana for a legendary artifact. It says a lot of things on it. Players can't activate planeswalkers. Your creatures get +1/+1. Your spells cost 1 less to cast. But it also says at the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card.
Right. So keep in mind, by the way, the Immortal Sun and Phyrexian Arena may seem very similar, but the Phyrexian Arena tells you at the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card, and the Immortal Sun says at the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card. That isn't going to matter here, but just keep in mind that the repeatable time when you draw the cards happens at different moments.
Here's a Jimmy favorite.
The Consecrated Sphinx, also 6 mana, like the Immortal Sun, but this one's 4 blue. For a 4/6 flying, whenever an opponent draws a card, you may draw 2 cards.
So this is a thing, because your opponents basically have to draw cards on their turn. I mean, except for in very corner cases. So this is a thing you can count on that's going to happen repeatably, in this case on everybody else's turn.
Yep. And so if a Consecrated Sphinx lasts 3 rounds, that's an additional potential 6 cards. So
that's 1 rotation.
That's 1 rotation, right.
Yeah,
and
3 rounds would be 18 cards.
Right. Oh, gosh.
Why it's so good.
And the Phyrexian Arena and the Immortal Sun is just 1 extra card on your turn. So there's a little bit of a difference there.
There are cards that are repeatable, but there's some sort of activation. Sometimes the activation costs you something, like Necropotence is a card that says skip your draw step. It's an enchantment for black. Whenever you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard. But it says you pay 1 life, exile the top card of your library face down, and then you put that card into your hand at the beginning of your next end step. So here's an interesting case where this doesn't technically draw you cards. If there was a card that said every time you draw a card, take a damage, it wouldn't do that. But at the same time, it puts cards into your hand, and you get to kind of choose based on how much life you have, how much you want to, how many cards you want to do. But then it's an enchantment that's still sitting there. So oftentimes you'll see people play Necropotence and be like, all right, I'll draw, I'll put 4 cards face down, put those into my hand, and then next turn, I'll play a few more, put 4 or 5 into my hand, and just continuously do this. Or you can do what Jimmy does sometimes is just draw 20 and go down to like 5 life.
Yeah. Necropotence is a little interesting too, because it's not card draw sometimes when you want to go over 7 cards and you don't have a maximum hand size card, because your end step happens before the cleanup step. So you put a bunch of cards there and then you have to discard. But still, even if you're drawing 2 cards off of this, like a divination, you play Necropotence, you paid 2 life, you drew 2 cards, you are now up cards, you have card advantage.
And you're going to do it again.
And you're going to do it again and again.
Yeah,
it's repeatable. Greed is also a very repeatable card. It's 3 in the black for an enchantment. You can pay black and pay 2 life to draw a card. So a little bit of a steeper life price. But again, repeatable. You can do it as many times as you want.
This next one's easy to get confused about whether it's card draw because it has a lot of text on it. It's Thrasios, Triton Hero. Thrasios has an activated ability for 4. You scry 1, and then you reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped. Otherwise, draw a card. Here's the thing. In either of those scenarios, you've effectively drawn a card. So even if it's a land, imagine you put that land in your hand and then played that land. That would still be an extra card you didn't have in your hand that now is on your side of the battlefield. So the fact that it just goes into the battlefield is actually a bonus because it can not count as your land drop for a turn.
Yeah, you can ramp out a ton of lands. That's why Thrasios with infinite mana also just wins.
Yeah. So, and it also just draws you a card if it's not a land. So, again, as many times as you have 4 generic mana, you can just do that over and over, so it's repeatable.
Mind's Eye is another card that you used to see a lot more play, not so much anymore. 5 mana for an artifact. Whenever an opponent draws a card, you may pay 1. If you do, draw a card. So similar to Consecrated Sphinx is that you're waiting for your opponents to draw cards, but in this case, you have to pay a mana, but you get to draw a card alongside them.
And you're going to have many opportunities to do it. So again, repeatable. Arcanus the Omnipotent, another repeatable draw effect, has a tap ability that says draw 3 cards.
Ooh-wee.
Has other abilities too, but that's the important one for our discussion. So any creature that tapped or activated to draw cards is a repeatable card draw, right? Because the creature presumably can live. Right. It's not whether it will stick around, it's just whether it can stick around, right? Obviously, they can Corrosive Grip your Phyrexian Arena before you ever draw cards off of it, but in most games, you can assume it's going to stick around for at least a little while and get you some card advantage.
Yeah, there are a lot, obviously, higher priority targets, like Consecrated Sphinxes most often get removed immediately. Same with Arcanuses. There's everyone's least favorite, or one of their least favorite Teferis, Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. This is a 3 blue-white planeswalker, and he has a +1 that says draw a card at the beginning of your next end step, untap up to 2 lands. So this is definitely card draw. You play him, you draw a card from him. It does replace itself immediately, so you're not up card advantage-wise. You have to wait another turn for that.
And again, Teferi would have to stick around and whatnot. Here's an interesting question, because presumably it's a plus ability, and there are many planeswalkers with plus abilities that effectively draw you a card. Would you count it as repeatable card draw if it was a negative ability, meaning I can only do that a few times?
If you can do it at least twice on the card, I think it's repeatable without having to plus it up again. Let's say if it's like a -1/-1, and then at that point, if you do it one more time, he dies. Because there is that Jace that draws everyone a card, and he can draw himself cards. So I think it is repeatable, but it's way less reliable.
There you go. All right, and the last one we're going to talk about in the repeatable section, and again, we can't talk about all repeatable card draw. There's much more than this, but this is an interesting one. It's Tamiyo's Journal. So it's 5 mana for a legendary artifact, and it says at the beginning of your upkeep, investigate, and that means you create a colorless clue artifact token, and the clue has pay 2, sacrifice this artifact, draw a card.
Okay.
Tamiyo's Journal also lets you tutor if you get enough clues. The fact that it's creating a thing that can then draw you cards, I think makes Tamiyo's Journal count as card draw.
Yeah, it's just more expensive. It's not, and think about it this way. For Phyrexian Arena, you're paying a life for a card. Tamiyo's Journal, you're paying 2.
Right.
And you're technically
2 mana.
2 mana, right? And you're technically it's card advantage because you're putting artifacts onto the battlefield, and if that's relevant for your deck, then yeah, you've gotten more quote unquote cards, even though they're kind of tokens.
All right, so repeatable card draw, when is it good and when is it bad?
Well, as you guys can tell here, a lot of these cards that say at the beginning of your upkeep, at the beginning of your draw step, you need for them to live a rotation of the table and hopefully live for many more. So these repeatable effects obviously are the best when you can play them as early as possible. And that way you know you're going to be able to use them across many different turns.
Yeah, that's a really good point. A lot of these cards do not draw you cards when you play them, right? For Phyrexian Arena, you play it, nothing happens for you right then. That card does nothing until it gets around to your upkeep again.
Yeah.
So these cards are good early in the game. If you play Phyrexian Arena on turn 2, that game's likely to go on for
8, 9 turns minimum.
So if Phyrexian Arena sticks around, that might draw you 7 cards in that game. But it's pretty bad if you draw it on turn 9 when the game's only got 2 turns maybe left, and you're just going to play a dead card that costs you 3 mana, basically, because what's going to happen is somebody's going to maybe win on the next 2 turns, and so there won't be enough time for the advantage of the repeatability of the thing to play out for you. So,
yeah, it's nice that Phyrexian Arena costs only 3 mana, but later in the game, you'd much rather have a Consecrated Sphinx get played, even though it costs more mana if it survives a turn cycle, right? That Phyrexian Arena on turn 2 drew you 6, 7 cards. That Consecrated Sphinx could draw you that many in a single turn cycle.
One of the reasons Consecrated Sphinx is so good, because it doesn't draw you the cards on your turn, but at least on the very next player's turn, it draws you cards, and then the next player's and the next player's. So it can refill your hand in short order. All right, let's talk about the next type of card draw here. We're calling it burst.
Pow!
These are effects that provide one quick burst of card draw. So they're not necessarily repeatable, but usually you draw the cards right now, but you don't get to do it over and over again without additional synergy. So one of my favorites is Treasure Cruise, which is 7 and a blue for a sorcery, but it has Delve. So you can exile cards from your graveyard while casting the spell to pay for the colorless or generic part of the cost. So it can be just blue, and it says draw 3 cards.
Okay.
So it can be Ancestral Recall. So this is a burst of card draw, just like 1 blue, draw 3 cards. But it's not Phyrexian Arena, right? Like, next turn, Treasure Cruise isn't really going to do anything for me unless I have other synergies in my deck.
Yeah, and this goes for almost every one of these sorcery or instants or even like enter the battlefield type effects where it's harder to use it multiple times because it's something that requires you to do. So pay for the spell. Whereas Phyrexian Arena, you're waiting for a trigger on an ability. So Knight's Whisper is a card that's very commonly played. It's just 1 in the black for a sorcery. You draw 2 cards, you lose 2 life. Happens once, you do it, it's done and over with.
Yep. Another one, Mole Drifter, is a burst card draw card. It's 4 and a blue for a 2/2 flyer. When it ETBs, you draw 2 cards. It also has Evoke for 2 and a blue, which just makes it into a divination.
The creature divination.
Yeah, but this is, again, everyone's thinking, well, I can blink the Mole Drifter, or I can, replay the Knight's Whisper out of my graveyard. Sure, but in the average case scenario, the card by itself just gives you a quick burst of card draw, which can be usable, but I understand why you want to do the synergy thing. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah. Burst to me, when we say it, is much bigger than just like a divination type effect. I'm thinking burst, you got to go big. You're going hard. You're playing an instant at the end step, and you're using all your mana for it. So something like Stroke of Genius, which is X2 in the blue, and it's just target player draws X cards at instant speed. This is the, you're going to burst this once, and you may never need to play it again. You don't care about playing it out of the graveyard because you just drew 6, 7 cards off it.
Yeah, that's plenty. That's what Phyrexian Arena was going to draw you in the entirety of the game, and You just did it in one turn. Sphinx's Revelation is very similar, but it also gains you life. Our preview card.
Yeah, Gadwick the Wizened, also an X cast. This isn't an instant, but when it enters the battlefield, you draw X cards. So whatever you can put into it mana-wise is what you're going to get out of it.
Yeah, so Burst does exist on all kinds of different, not just instants and sorcerers, right? There's a creature that does it. I would call Ad Nauseam a Burst card draw card. So this is 3 black for an instant. You reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. Then you lose life equal to its converted mana cost, the card that you put into your hand. And then you may repeat this process any number of times. Often you see people play Ad Nauseam and just draw like 20 cards because they're made their deck all 1 and 2 CMC.
Yeah.
So and lands are 0. And so this effectively can often put, tons of cards into your hand very quickly. It's definitely a CEDH style card.
Yep, and a modern deck that just wins on the spot when they cast it as well.
Yep.
Wheel of Fortune, one of Josh's favorites, is definitely one of the stronger burst cards. For 2 and a red for a sorcery, each player discards their hand, then draws 7 cards. Now, it's important that we're going to talk about this wheel effect here because there are wheel effects out there that are not necessarily good card draw because they actually put you down cards.
Yeah, they're not even card draw at all under our definition.
Yeah.
Things like Winds of Change, Molten Psyche. They say each player shuffles the cards from their hand into their library and then draws that many cards. Wheel of Fortune says discard your hand, draw 7 cards. So if your hand only has 2 cards in it, you're effectively up 5 cards at the end of Wheel of Fortune, whereas Winds of Change, Molten Psyche, you're at the same amount of cards you had before. So that's more like card selection.
And you use the cards. So let's say you went from 3 cards down to 2 and you only drew 2 off of that. That's not great.
It's actually card disadvantage.
Yeah, it's really, really bad, actually.
And then there are some permanent types that you can sacrifice to draw a burst of cards. So something like Dreamstone Hedron, which is a mana rock for 6 that taps for 3 diamond mana. Or you can pay 3 and sacrifice and tap it to draw 3 cards. So that could be a burst of card draw.
Yep. Font of Fortunes is very similar. It's 1 in the blue enchantment, and you can pay 1 in the blue sacrifice to draw 2 cards. So it happens whenever you want it to and you have the mana. And Dreamstone Hedron is a lot of mana to cast, but at least it also buys back some of the mana. So that card has like 2 different things going for it, which is nice.
So question here, what's the upside of burst versus repeatable card draw? When is burst better or worse?
In general, I like having a mix of both, but burst is one of those sort of like, we need to pull the fire alarm. I need to catch back up really quickly and do so in a significant way. So even if it is paying 1 blue for 3 cards off Treasure Cruise or drawing even 4 or 5 cards off Stroke of Genius, if you need something quickly and you need it now, it's a great way of doing it. And also, like later on in the game, I've typically found that these are the cards that get someone right back into it because they're just searching for that one answer.
I like that part. I think burst card draw is better later in the game, obviously, than repeatable card draw is. So that Treasure Cruise on turn 8 is amazing because it costs you 1 mana, gives you 3 cards right now, and now you're back in the game. You've got ammunition, you reloaded, and you still have most of your mana available to continue that turn. Whereas Treasure Cruise less good early in the game, and Treasure Cruise or any of these are a little less good early in the game than like Phyrexian Arena would be, because let's think of Night's Whisper, very efficient, 2 mana, draw 2, but Phyrexian Arena on turn 3 and Night's Whisper on turn 3, Phyrexian Arena is going to end up giving you 5 or 6 cards maybe in that game, whereas Night's Whisper only gives you 2. Thing is, Night's Whisper on turn 9 gives you the 2 cards right now rather than play Phyrexian Arena and wait. So yeah, it's this balancing act, and I think understanding like what kind of deck you're playing, what it wants to do, what kind of meta you're in, helps you decide between burst and repeatable.
And some decks want to draw cards slowly and consistently over the game instead of all at once because you're maybe a deck that needs to constantly be playing threats or keep the pressure on, as opposed to a deck that needs to just come out of nowhere and assemble a combo, which burst might be a little bit better for you in that case.
All right, let's talk about the next type of card draw here. And you'll notice that burst and repeatable are categories that almost all of the remaining card draw will fall into. They'll either be something that happens over and over again or something that happens kind of once for a lot.
Yeah, and most importantly, those cards go into your hand as opposed to this next group, which is Impulsive, which is the sort of new way that Wizards has decided that red is going to quote-unquote draw cards. So these are effects that will say exile the top card of your library until the next turn you may play that card, or until your next end step, or whatever it is. But basically that card doesn't exist in your hand. It exists in an exile zone, and there's a time restriction as to when you can play it.
Yeah, Impulsive Draw is is something we've seen them just lean into a lot in recent years as like, oh, red can do this. Let's give red more ways to do this. And we would count this, I think, as card draw, even though these cards are not technically going into your hand. They're cards you have access to. So examples of this are Outpost Siege, which is 3 in a red for an enchantment. It has 2 modes, but the mode we're talking about here is at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card. So that's a card you have access to during your turn that you wouldn't have otherwise. And it's very similar. Well, it's not the exact same. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it's very similar to as if that card had gone into your hand, right?
Yeah.
Stolen Strategy is one that does that, but for your opponent's libraries. Again, I would consider this card draw because it gives you access to those cards, and you can spend mana as though we're mana of any color.
And those cards stay exiled, and you can play them forever as well. There's no timing restriction on Stolen Strategy.
Yeah, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of each opponent's library until end of turn.
Oh, sorry, until end of turn. My bad.
Until end of turn, you may cast spells from among those exiled cards, and you may spend mana as though we're mana of any color to cast them. So it Outpost Sieges your opponents, but all 3 of them, or 4 of them, depending on if you've got a 5-player game or whatever. I guess all 9 of them if you're crazy. But that is, I would count that as card draw, even though it's not coming from your deck, because that's just more cards you have access to.
Not to mention you can use any mana, right? So you can really cast those cards because you can tap whatever you want.
And this next one is kind of the stroke of genius version of this, right? It's the burst version.
Yeah, and this one's really interesting. We'll read the text here. It's Commune with Lava for X red red, and it says exile the top X cards of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play those cards.
So this gives you a big burst of cards that it exiles and gives you access to, again, though, for a limited amount of time, although the timing restriction you'll notice on this one is until your next turn. And I guess that sort of brings us to the next point in our discussion about Impulsive Draw. There are certain things to pay attention to on the wording of Impulsive Draw. I think either they're turning these knobs purposefully differently every time, or it just took them a while to figure out how to do Impulsive Draw, because there are some things that are different on each one. For instance, it'll say until end of turn or until your next turn, you may play those cards, or sometimes it says you may cast those cards.
Right, which is different. Casting is a spell. Playing, you can do stuff to lands, so that's how you can get extra land drops from like your opponent's library. With Stolen Strategy, however,
I think it's cast.
Cast, yeah. And Commune with Lava is play.
Yeah, so with Commune with Lava, if you exile lands off the top of your deck, you could play that as your land drop for turn if you haven't already dropped your land. Whereas, Outpost Siege, I think, only says cast until end of turn. Outpost Siege says play.
Yeah.
Stolen Strategy says cast. So that's just something to pay attention to. I don't think it vastly changes whether they're card draw or not, but it does change how good they are. Obviously, you would rather be able to play lands off of it than not, right?
Yeah, because if everyone's deck is 36, 37% lands, you're very likely to hit them, especially with like cards like Paco and Haldan as well. They can play the cards off the top, which is really, really fun.
And then the other thing here is the timing restriction. So there are differences. Play this until end of turn, or play this until the end of your next turn.
Right, so it doesn't count the turn that you cast it.
Yeah, so Commune with Lava allows you to do that as an instant, maybe even during your turn, play a land that turn, then it comes to your next turn, play another land out of it possibly, and really get more advantage than Outpost Siege, which says until end of this turn, you may play that card, which means that if there are 2 lands exiled somehow with effects like that, you couldn't play them. Or, if you don't have enough mana this turn, but you're going to hit your land drop next turn and have enough mana, you might be able to cast that spell where you couldn't if it was until just the end of this turn.
Yeah, and those cards are really fun too, because you can sometimes time them up as an instant, right? You can be like, I'm going to do it at this person's end step, so I actually have almost an extra turn if you can give some things instant speed just based on the text.
So some things to keep in mind about Impulsive Draw, and I think the overall thing that we talk about it as card draw, right, on the show?
Yeah.
A lot. But it is much worse than regular card draw.
Oh, it's way worse.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, this is just how Wizards is balancing the color pies. We can't give every single color the same power of draw cards as blue or even green. So in a lot of cases, it's like, how do we restrict it? And for red, it's timing for the most part.
Yeah, so... Well, it's timing and wording. So that cast play thing means that many forms of Impulsive Draw don't allow you to play lands. Regular card draw is just cards in hand. You can play the lands as normal. So that's a downside. If you don't play cards by the end of the timing restriction, whether it's this turn or your next turn, you often lose access to that card.
It gets exiled forever.
Yeah. So that can be pretty bad in a singleton Highlander format, right? Exiling key synergy pieces, unique combo pieces. So it can be dangerous to have impulsive draw in that you might get rid of a card that you really, really want or need in the deck that you just can never get back now.
Or it's a card that is very conditional, like it's a red elemental blast and you can't actually play it because you have to have someone play another spell in response to it. So I think a lot of times impulsive draw decks need to make sure that they don't build their decks with so many cards that are reactionary. Otherwise you're going to just run into you're gonna hit non-things that you can cast more often than not.
Yeah, think about Outpost Siege says you have to cast that spell by the end of your turn. If you exile a counter spell with that card, it's not 100% worthless because obviously you could counter something during your own turn.
Right.
But it's mostly worthless because by the time you normally cast those on your opponent's turns, and by the time it's Jimmy's turn, you can't cast that card anymore because of the timing restriction. High CMC cards are usually bad with impulsive draw because you just exile a card on turn 5 that costs 9 mana and you can't cast yet, so that's like you didn't even draw a card. Super situational cards, something like Rakdos Charm,
right?
Which is like that's a card I want to hold in my hand till they go to mess with their graveyard, then exile their graveyard, or until they make a ton of tokens, then dome them for 1 million damage. Well, I can't just hold that in my hand because I have to use it within a certain period of time. So impulsive draw bad for that reason. Another thing that you mentioned, which I really like actually, is red elemental blast or something, right?
Yeah.
Most of these effects exile the card face up.
Yeah.
So your opponent
see it coming.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like you had to draw a card. It's very restricted, and you have to show it to everybody. So if it's like a get 'em card, deflecting swat or something like that, even if you can wait until your next turn, it sucks because I had to show everybody what the card was.
It almost gives your opponents more choices to be like, oh, cool, I'm not going to do that now. Or like, I'm not going to do anything that baits out that response. I know it's there. I'm just going to play around it. And that's one of those things that feels really bad because all they have to do is just wait a turn typically. And then boom, you don't have access to the card anymore.
So even given all of these downsides that impulsive draw has, do you think it's fair to call impulsive draw card draw?
It comes with a caveat of you need to be able to cast it for it to count as card advantage and card draw. So a lot of the times, I think like if your deck isn't built that way, and these like we're gonna again get into the corner cases, I would consider this card draw only if you're able to reliably cast the cards that you reveal off the top. So if your deck's like loaded up with Eldrazi and you're doing a bunch of impulsive draw, you're probably not doing it right.
Yeah, I think that because like when you're laying out your deck, I don't know if you do this, I sort of lay out the ramp and then lay out the card draw, and I try and have like our 10 and 10 of each thing, at a minimum. And Outpost Siege goes in the card draw pile though. Yeah. But I think you're right. Outpost Siege is sometimes bad as a card draw card if the rest of your deck doesn't understand how impulsive draw is and what its downsides are.
Yeah. And
so be careful when you put it there. Just make sure that it works with the rest of your deck. But I also think synergy has to matter in a lot of respects, right? Don't put Zendikar Resurgent, which we're going to talk about in a little bit here, in a deck that only has 5 creatures in it, right? So that's the deck builder's fault. I think that Outpost Siege is card draw, even if it won't always be card draw if you build your deck incorrectly.
Yeah, definitely keep that in mind. I like that point about Zendikar Resurgent too. I've done that before where you're like, oh, this card's great, it's awesome card draw, but it depends on the rest of my deck actually synergizing with it.
Yeah, and you're like, in this deck, it's actually not that good. I got to replace it with something else.
Yep.
All right, the next category of card draw is sort of a different take, similar to impulsive draw on card draw. It's effects that let you play cards directly off the top of your library. So we're talking about stuff like, well, I think the big, most scary one of these is Bolas's Citadel.
Yep, this is a card that just lets you pay life instead of the CMC off the top of your library, and then you can sacrifice 10 permanents to make non-lands to make people lose life as well. But the most important thing is that you just constantly have access to the top of your library, and you can see it, and you can cast it if you have the life for it.
Yeah, and you can sort of ignore the life part because I think that's more like in a ramp category, but just the ability to look at the top card of your library and then play it. And Bolas's Citadel lets you play lands too and cast basically any card. There's no restriction on it. That is card draw, right? Because I didn't have that card in my hand. It was on top of my library. And what I did is I looked at it and played it as if it were in my hand. So it's very similar to impulsive draw in that there are some downsides to that as opposed to if it were in your hand, but at the same time, it gives me access to a card that I didn't have.
Yeah, imagine your hand size just went from 7 to 8.
Right.
That technically is card draw because you've increased the maximum number of cards you can have in your hand.
Even more than that, right? Because once you play that top card, you now have access to the next top card and whatever that is. Future Sight is another card that does this, as well as Experimental Frenzy.
Yeah, Red's definitely got a lot of help here, but Experimental Frenzy and the red ones, you'll find that they always have to include some sort of downside with it. They can't just be pure put a card into your hand.
Right. So again, we got to note that playing cards from the top of your library is not as good as just drawing a bunch of cards, because for one, you can't often optimally sequence your plays.
Yeah.
So imagine like Bolas's Citadel, and you've got like a 1-drop creature and you play it, and then the next card is Aura Shards, and you're like, dang, if I would have known, I would want to play the Aura Shards, then the 1-drop creature. But you can't sequence the plays because Bolas's Citadel says, nope, you have to play the top card to then play the next top card to then play the next top card. Not saying Bolas's Citadel is bad. It's one of the most powerful cards in the format. Just there are downsides to playing cards off the top of your library. You can't be optimal about your sequencing.
Yeah, and sometimes you'll get a land on top after you've already played your land drop, and boom, you are just sort of locked out of continuing the chain of events. However, this is still a card that you would not have had otherwise. And, you could say like, oh, darn, I'm not going to cast Divination because the third card down is the Aura Shards and I drew 2 creatures off it. So like, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you can always get very specific and even a little petty about how advantaged you are by it. But I think these are all fair to call card draw. You get access to another card, even if it's not ideal in terms of when you can play it and how you want to sequence it. It's still an extra card in your hand.
Yeah, I agree. All right, next up, we are going to talk about what is the most common and often most powerful type of card draw. And then we're going to continue a discussion about a bunch of fringe cards
that
exciting. We're not sure if they even are card draw or not. We may not agree amongst ourselves. But before that, we're going to take a quick break and hear a message from our sponsors. I feel like the single most important piece of clothing that I own has got to be...
Your hats?
That's a good guess. I love my hats. But no, it's my MeUndies. Seriously, the softest and most comfortable clothing that I own.
Well, that makes 2 of us. I can honestly say that MeUndies is my favorite part of my wardrobe and the best underwear I've ever worn.
And here's the big thing, and what we both love the most, I'm sure, is that MeUndies is really serious about softness. Like, so serious that they scoured the world for the softest fabric there is.
Yeah, so I was actually reading into their process online. It all starts with sustainably sourced beechwood trees that magically turn from pulp to yarn to undies.
Magically, I like
Magic.
that.
MeUndies that kind of feel like heaven on your skin. It's great comfort from the outside, literally to in.
And you can keep your undies drawer stocked with a MeUndies membership, a subscription that sends new pairs to your door with site-wide savings and exclusive sales.
And there's so many different designs to choose from. You've got your classic colors as well as a ton of really fun and adorable prints.
Plus, right now, MeUndies has a great offer for all of our listeners. To get 15% off your first order, free shipping, and a 100% satisfaction guarantee, go to MeUndies.com/command.
That's MeUndies.com/command for 15% off your first order. All right, we are back talking about every single thing that we can about card draw. And we were just talking about impulsive draw, some of the more burst and different ways of card draw. And now let's move on to what we are liking to call conditional card draw. So cards that draw you cards, but only if certain conditions are met. And this can fall under burst or repeatable because there are a lot of cards in this category.
Yeah, this is probably the most common single category. All these cards are different and go into different decks, but this thing where like you have to meet a condition and then you get card draw is just very common. This is the type of synergy we see in a lot of decks, and a lot of commanders just have that. Like Chulane is one of these, right? And you play a creature, you draw a card. So these can both be burst and repeatable. There's a lot of these effects that kind of go by card type. So we mentioned it earlier, Zendikar Resurgent. When it's a big enchantment that doubles your mana, but also says whenever you cast a creature spell, you draw a card. Guardian Project, very similar.
Pretty much the same thing, yeah.
Yeah, it's like half of Zendikar Resurgent, kind of.
It's enter the battlefield on Guardian Project, which is kind of nuts. So that's like buy creatures. Those of you that remember Melissa DeTora playing an Enchantress deck, there's a lot in the Enchantress world. So Mesa Enchantress, Verdura Enchantress. Basically, whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you get to draw a card.
Yep, there's one for, or there's many, but again, we're not going to list every single example of this. We're just, giving you examples. Yeah, exactly. So there's ones that care about historic cards like Joyra, Weatherlight Captain, or artifacts or equipment. SRAM is a good one. There's tribal stuff. So Vanquisher's Banner, Champion of Dusk, Sanctum of Calm Waters.
Oh, right. The new Shrine deck.
If you're in a Shrine tribal deck.
Yeah. And then there's ones that just care about spells. So like Trail of Evidence is one that whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you investigate. So you make that colorless clue token that can draw you a card. And then there's, of course, Big Daddy Niv-Mizzet Perun that is just very good at drawing cards in general because it's whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, you draw a card. So, but again, it's conditional, right? You can easily play this card and, someone has an edict effect on a Dictate of Erebos. Well, your Niv-Mizzet is not drawing you any cards. So it's not necessarily guaranteed, but it oftentimes will at least net one card out of it based on, your deck construction and all that.
Yep. There's a bunch that are based on combat. So there's combat that says, there's cards that say on attack, you'll draw a card. So the new card, Elder Gargaroth,
right,
which got a little bit of play in a recent episode of Game Nights. One of the modes is when it attacks, draw a card. Kestia, the Cultivator, which is the bestow aura commander. It says whenever an enchanted creature or enchantment creature you control attacks, draw a card. So there's a bunch of conditions there, right? It's not just when creatures you control attack, but it's enchanted creatures or enchantment creatures.
Yeah, and a lot of cards could be drawn from that too.
Let me just pause here and ask you a question. It's Kestia the Cultivator. How come it doesn't have anything to do with the
ramp?
card? Yeah, with getting you lands in your hand. Okay, sorry.
True. What is she cultivating? I guess more cards. I guess there's a lot of cultivation that happens in Magic.
Sorry, side tangent.
Kindred Discovery as well. This is a card that has rocketed up in value because it allows you to basically have a tribal theme matters that gives you cards every single time they enter the battlefield or attacks. So this is nice because it has two different ways that it can draw you cards. It's not just like has to attack or has to do X.
Then there's, of course, combat based on when you deal combat damage. So all that last stuff we just mentioned is only on attacks. But then when you deal combat damage, like Sword of Fire and Ice is going to trigger when you deal combat damage to a player. And that does 2 damage to something, draws you a card.
Biden of Thassa is very similar. It can also actually make other creatures attack to let your attacks be open, and then Mask of Memory as well. Typically, this is much harder to achieve, dealing combat damage instead of just attacking. And then you can't do like the shenanigans with like Reconnaissance, where they attack and then you remove it from combat, but you still get the trigger.
Oh, no, you still can. You do it after damages.
Well, as in, like, you can't, like, I can't hit anyone, but I can still attack and remove them from combat.
Right.
The combat damage part, if there's too many blockers or things around, makes it a bit tougher to hit.
There's a bunch that are tied to life gain. So Well of Lost Dreams is one that triggers when you gain life. Dawn of Hope, and then you have to pay an additional cost and draw some cards that way.
There is some that cares about damaging your opponents and its impulsive draw. So this is like, again, red is getting a little bit more help here. Theater of Horrors. It's actually just if your opponent lost life this turn, you can play lands and cast spells from among cards exiled with Theater of Horrors, which you do automatically at the beginning of each upkeep. So this one has a bunch of different hoops to jump through, but still gets the job done.
Yeah, it doesn't care if the damage is like combat damage or not. So you can do direct damage, and that kind of turns on the cards that you've stowed away with Theater of Horrors. It's interesting because that's multi-conditional, right? There's multiple conditions that you have to meet. Even
if they fetch land during your turn, that counts as a loss of life.
Yep.
So
then there's Jori N, Ruin Diver, which is sort of whenever you cast your second spell each turn, you draw a card. So that's another kind of condition, right? It's are you kind of storming off? I mean, it's not exactly just two spells, but
they've given this idea a little more love recently too, which is like cast more than one spell a turn, get an additional bonus.
It's a design space they can always go into because it's like, all right, we already have this, but what if we just add this condition to that other thing, and then boom, there's a bunch of cards that just they have multiple conditions that you have to meet.
Yep, one of the very few white card draw spells, Mentor of the Meek, needs to have creatures with power 2 or less enter the battlefield, and you need to pay a mana for it, but then you get to draw a card.
Yeah, it's creatures. They got to be small creatures. It's like Guardian Project is like, hey, any creature, you get cards. Mentor of the Meek's like, not any creature. They got to be little creatures. Also, you have to pay some mana.
Yeah.
It's
rough.
Bygone Bishop is similar. It cares about CMC instead of the power of the creature.
And gives you clues.
Yep. There's ones that call it... sorry. I almost skipped the best card draw spell that cares about small creatures.
Yeah, just straight up Skull Clamp. And this one, I think, is just so much better than the other two we mentioned because you just need to pay 1 to equip it to something and you get 2 cards out of the deal. Anything with power 1 or less, or toughness 1 or less, or if you just have a sack outlet, or if it just dies, right? So that's just an easy thing to do in a lot of commander decks.
But it is a condition you have to jump through, right? The Skull Clamp has to be on the creature, and that creature has to die. There's things that care about big creatures. So Greater Good is kind of a weird way to talk about big creatures, but it's an enchantment where you sacrifice a creature and then draw cards equal to that sacrificed creature's power and then discard 3 cards.
So this sometimes could be card disadvantage if you're not sacrificing a big enough power creature. But generally, you're going to want to sacrifice something with 10 power, draw 10 cards, then discard 3 cards. So you're definitely up there.
Yeah, and Greater Good isn't really great in a deck that has only small creatures, right? You want to be usually you're making tokens like 4/4 or bigger, and then Greater Good is you're always up a card. So it sort of cares about big creatures in that way. Rishkar's Expertise, this is a sorcery. We've talked mostly about enchantments or creatures here, or artifacts, permanents basically. But this is 4 green for a sorcery. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control.
Oof.
And then you may cast a spell with converted mana cost 5 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. That second part's kind of gravy to the card draw portion, which is, you don't want to pay 6 mana to only draw 2 or 3 cards. You want to draw like 5 or 6. So this, again, kind of cares about big creatures. Then there's the creatures must die category. So you get value when the creatures die. So that's a condition you have to meet.
Yep.
Similar to Skull Clamp.
And definitely something that the color black loves more than anything else.
Yep.
So Harvester of Souls, the newest Liliana Dreadhorde General, Midnight Reaper are all looking for creatures to die. And when they do, you get to draw cards thanks to that.
There's these interesting cards that are sort of tribal, but also you have to have a specific number of that type of tribe out, and then you can draw cards. This one's a Jimmy Wong favorite.
Yeah, Kumena, Tyrant of Raska, tapping 3 untapped Merfolk to draw a card. You can also tap itself, so you technically only have to have 2 other creatures there. And then there's Crypt Breaker, which is sort of the zombie version of it. These cards, I think, have to be tribal, right? You can't just play these in any deck. But when they get going, and you have ways to also untap cards, there's a lot of value that can be gained there.
Yep. Then there's Combat Plus. So not just you have to deal combat damage, but you have to deal combat damage with specific creatures in order to draw cards. So there's like Subira, which I played on the most recent.
Well, you never got to draw a single card?
No, I didn't. But Subira has that activated ability. You pay 1 red tapper and then discard your hand. And until end of turn, whenever a creature you control with power 2 or less deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So this is saying a lot of hoops and a lot of conditions, but if you meet them, then you could draw a bunch of cards if you had like 5 creatures with 2 or less that were going to deal combat damage.
Yeah, actually kind of exciting to discard your hand and then, hope that you get some creatures through.
I hope so.
Because there is a period of time in between where there are no cards in your hand.
That's a good point. Where if they Psych Rift, you're just...
Oh, yeah, you are in for it. Bred for the Hunt is very similar, too. It's an enchantment that says whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter that deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. Obviously a bit stronger than good old Tolzidi Subira, yeah.
There's Keeper of Fables, which is a card from Eldraine.
Reed Duke played this one.
Yeah, whenever one or more non-human creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. So again, you got to deal combat damage, and those creatures have to be non-humans, and then you draw cards. So lots of hoops to jump through.
Yep.
Then there's a whole category of cards which I would call conditional, but they are your opponent's choice. The condition is, does your opponent decide to let you draw the cards, or can they afford?
Yeah.
Or can they not afford to stop you? So Ristic Study, I think, falls into this category.
Yeah, you've been wondering when we're about to say that card, and here it is finally. 45 minutes into the episode is Ristic Study.
So whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1. And so they kind of decide whether they're going to let you draw it or whether they have the mana to stop you.
Yeah.
Mystic Remora is another
Very
version
similar.
of this, but it says non-creature spell, and it has a cumulative upkeep.
Brand new in white is Mangara the Diplomat. Whenever an opponent attacks with creatures, if 2 or more of those are attacking you and or planeswalkers you control, draw a card. Not terribly relevant, but the second part is whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, draw a card.
Yep.
So it requires your opponents to do something, and typically they will be able to see the effect and decide, okay, do I need to pay the 1 for Ristic Study? Do I want to cast my second spell this turn or wait?
Yeah, and you would think that would make them much worse, because obviously we say this all the time, when your opponent has the choice, then a lot of times they're going to do the choice that is the least advantageous for you. But I find, Ristic Study, one of the best, maybe the best card draw spell in the casual side of the format.
It's nuts, yeah.
Yeah, and so often if you put them in a position where it's difficult for them to stop you from drawing the cards, even though they technically have a choice, these cards can still be very good.
Well, not just that, but technically, if they are paying for that, you're almost putting them at a card disadvantage. Because let's say they have 9 mana to pay for a 5 mana, 4 mana spell, but they don't want to have you draw cards. Now they can't cast both spells. You just put them at a disadvantage, and you either drew cards because they did pay or not. So there's a lot to Ristic Study that makes it much better than just what it seems.
There's Waste Not, which is another card that gives your opponents opponents the choice. It's 1 in black for enchantment. It does stuff when your opponents discard cards. So if they discard a creature, you get a 2/2 zombie. If they discard a land, you get 2 black mana. But whenever an opponent discards a non-creature, non-land card, you draw a card. So this can be a choice in that they're going to choose not to discard the ones that draw you cards. But then often it isn't because you're making them discard just all of the cards they have.
Yeah, typically Waste Not, you're the one that wants to control their discard. But if you're against a deck that just loots a bunch, then they are in for it. Risk Factor, the red version of a card that I think is pretty bad in Commander until very, very late in the game. So it's 2 in red for an instant, and target opponent may have Risk Factor deal 4 damage to them. If they don't, then you get to draw 3 cards, and you get to jumpstart this, so you get to cast this twice. So it does a lot of direct damage. However, if they decide to not take that damage, they're probably going to have to be pretty low. You get to draw a few cards.
Yeah, or they want you to find answers.
Yeah.
Sire of Stagnation, a card that a lot of people were really high on when it came out, but we don't see it much anymore.
Yeah, kind of sad.
Blue-black for a 5/7 with the Void, but it says whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, that player exiles the top 2 cards of their library and you draw 2 cards. So it kind of reverse landfalls for them. What I found is that you play this card and everybody just kind of agrees, hey, let's not play a land for a second until we kill this thing.
Gets out of here, yeah. Whereas with Consecrated Sphinx, you cannot stop your automatic draw at the beginning of your turn. But
this is still giving your opponents the choice about you drawing cards. And then, of course, we already mentioned it, but Niv-Mizzet Parun, is back on here because it's whenever a player casts a instant or sorcery, you draw a card. So not only can you cast instants and sorceries, but your opponents can choose whether or not to do that as well.
And this one's a lot tougher because usually the way you get rid of Niv-Mizzet Parun is by using an instant or sorcery, and then at that point, your opponent has at least drawn 1 card with it, so they've broken even.
All right, so this is easily the conditional category. Conditional card draw is easily the most robust category.
Thick.
And we obviously can't go through all of them. I think it's just important to note that conditional doesn't necessarily mean worse, right? Because a lot of the cards we talked about in this category, Ristic Study, Mystic Remora, Guardian Project are among the best card draw spells in the format.
Yeah, I think it just depends on what the condition is. If it's taxing someone mana like Mystic Remora, which is a huge tax, then yeah, it's amazing. Like Ristic Study even, a single card like that can just change the dynamic of the game where you start to rise above the rest of the players because not every single player is going to know that, I should always be paying for Ristic Study. So definitely some of these are worse than others, but conditional in general, can be very good regardless, just depending on the situation.
All right, let's go to the last category of card draw here, and it is restrictive. And these are effects that only draw you certain types of cards. They can't just draw you anything. Mm-hmm. So one category of this that there's a lot of are cards that only find you lands, right? So Oracle of Moldiah is a really good example of this. It's 3 and a green for a 2/2. It says you may play an additional land on each of your turns. Not relevant for this discussion. But it says play with the top card of your library revealed. You may play lands from the top of your library.
Aha.
So remember, similar to Bolas' Citadel and those cards we talked about earlier, if you play a card from the top of your library, that's the equivalent of having drawn that card and then played it. It's a card that wasn't in your hand, but was virtually in your hand.
Yep.
So Oracle of Moldiah says, I can only draw you land cards sometimes if they happen to be on the top of your library, but that can be card advantage and that can be sort of similar to card draw.
Yeah, and sometimes you can even get 2 in a row if you have an Oracle. Same goes with cards like Courser of Krufix, which again allows you to play lands from the top of your library. Just think of it as increasing your hand size by 1 more, and in this case, it is a land or the card everyone can see it, so even if it's not a land or not.
Yeah, New Rada does a very similar thing. And again, just because they don't allow you to play that additional land per turn doesn't really affect whether they're a card draw or not.
Yeah.
A big one that people get confused about and we talk about a lot is land tax. So this is 1 white mana for an enchantment. It's just about to be reprinted in Double Masters. At the beginning of your upkeep, if an opponent controls more lands than you, you may search your library for up to 3 basic lands, reveal them, put them into your hand, and then shuffle your library. So it's conditional, right? Because it won't even happen unless a condition is met, which is your opponent has more lands than you. But then it's also restrictive in that you can't draw just any card off of it. You're going to draw lands off of it.
Basic lands, too, at that.
Yeah, true. But it's still very, very powerful because just getting 3 extra cards in your hand that happen to be lands, one of the big reasons we like card draw in all decks and we say every deck needs them is simply to hit your land drops, which land tax will help you do.
Yep, and quote-unquote thin out your deck, even though we know that's not a major part of why land tax is so good. Endless Horizons is a really interesting white card. It's 3 in the white for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for any number of plains cards and exile them, then shuffle your library. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a card you owned with exiled with Endless Horizons into your hand. So you could, in a mono white deck, you could grab 30 lands out of your deck with this and
Seems risky.
them. Seems risky, yeah, if someone gets rid of your
Maybe
Endless
just do
Horizons.
like 6 or 7.
Yeah. But that's still a lot, right? It's a guarantee to get another card from Endless Horizons out of your sort of exile zone. So you're drawing a card every single time. It just happens to be a land.
Right. Now, of course, somebody can remove the Endless Horizon, so maybe it doesn't last forever. But this is, once it's out, it's kind of similar to a Phyrexian Arena in that it'll get you a card every single turn. Now, that card will always be a land, but that is still a card that you didn't have access to. So this restrictive draw is hard to categorize as far as how good it is, but I would still count this stuff, especially in white, as card draw.
Notably, it's any plains card, so it doesn't have to be basics necessarily, which is kind of cool.
So there are also cards that are restrictive towards instants and sorcery. So Elsha of the Infinite, it says you may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast non-creature spells from the top of your library. If you cast this way, you may cast it as though it had flash. So, sorry, non-creatures, not just instants and sorceries,
right.
but Elsha kind of gives you card advantage, but only for those, but not for lands and not for creatures, right?
Yeah, Melek is very similar. Again, it's just like top of your library is now accessible, and you can cast instants and sorceries from it. However, in this case, Melek also copies them, so it's almost like you're drawing 2 cards sometimes.
Yeah, 2 cards sometimes and 0 when it's not an instant or sorcery.
Yep.
There are ones that care about creatures, so Vizier of the Menagerie, Duskwatch Recruiter. They both care about creatures on top of your library. There are a bunch of tribal ones.
Yeah, this is like, I would say in the last year and a half, 2 years, Wizards has just gone very ham on tribal. There's tribal everything now. So,
and a lot of it's that type where it's like, choose a creature type, then do this thing for that creature type. So it kind of works for a bunch of different ones, like Icon of Ancestry, Herald's Horn. Yeah.
Depala Pilot Exemplar is all about vehicles and stuff. And then you have like...
And dwarves.
Yeah, dwarves. Kalia Zenith Seeker, looking for specific things that Kalia loves. There's the brand new Muxus Goblin Grandee, which is just all about putting goblin cards into your hand.
When they enter the battlefield, you look at the top X cards of your library. That's 6 for Kalia and for Muxus both.
Right.
And Muxus
I think,
gives you all the goblins and puts them into play.
Which is nuts.
Yeah, but I think people get confused when something goes into play versus goes into their hand. Both of those things are card draw, right? Those are cards you got that you didn't have in your hand before. One of them is just better because it also casts the cards or virtually casts them. In Muxus's case, Kalia just puts the Angels, Demons, and Dragons into your hand, but that's still card draw if you find cards with them.
Yep.
There's Winota, which is another new one that's kind of similar.
Yeah, Winota's kind of crazy. A lot of times people see this and they're going, oh, you're just cheating mana cost. You're just getting cards, onto the battlefield. But like Josh said, this is card draw in a way. You're just skipping the part where it hits your hand and then you have to pay the mana to cast it.
Right.
So Winota, again, is like whenever a non-human creature you control attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may put a human creature card from among them onto the battlefield tapped and attacking, and it gains indestructible. So again, you just sort of just like ramp it up. Winota swings out and boom, it's as though you've drawn cards out of those top 6 because you can put one of them from among them on the battlefield anytime a non-human creature attacks. So there's a lot.
It's conditional.
It's
restrictive, and yet Winota very, very powerful, right?
Yeah.
Like Winota decks are kind of nuts. There's stuff for artifacts. So Mystic Forge is a good one. You pay 4 mana for an artifact. It says you may look at the top card of your library at any time, and then you may cast the top card of your library if it's an artifact card or a colorless non-land card. You can also pay 1 life, tap the Mystic Forge, and exile the top card of your library. Just kind of look for another artifact or a colorless card if it's not there. But this is restrictive, right? It's allowing you to play the top card of your library, but only if it's certain cards, artifacts or colorless cards.
Yep. Same goes for Tezzeret, Master of Metal, who is +1 is reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal an artifact card. You put it into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. In a lot of ways, this can also tutor. If you happen to play like a Tezzeret Master of Metal and only have 1 artifact in your deck, you're going to draw it no matter what.
There's a lot of this effect too, is like reveal cards until you reveal an artifact, a planeswalker, a creature, an enchantment. Across like Magic's history, there's been a bunch of that. And I think that's something to note about this restrictive effects. Some of the effects in this category will always find you something, like Tezzeret. It's going to go until it hits an artifact. And then some can whiff, like Mystic Forge, which says, look at the top card of your library. If it's artifact or colorless, you can cast it. If it's not, then you have to activate the ability and try again. But Tezzer's like, nope, I'm going to find you an artifact, whatever the next artifact is. So when you activate this, you will always get something.
Yeah, whereas Winota, Muxus, if you just don't happen to have those cards in the top 6, then you're out of luck.
Yeah, you get nothing. You can whiff.
Yep. Scrying Sheets is like one of the few ones that can do this in mono red and mono white for snow lands, where it's a snow land where you can tap 1 and a snow covered something and tap it to look at the top card of your library. If that card is snow, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. So it helps you draw snow permanents, including your lands.
Which will usually be your lands, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so restrictive stuff is our last category of card draw, and now we're going to move on to sort of how we bring this together and learn to build better decks out of it. So how do you choose your card draw? We've got these categories: repeatable, burst, impulsive, casting from the top of your library, conditional stuff, restrictive stuff. It's a lot. What are some questions or things we think about when choosing which cards in which categories that we might want to put in our deck?
Well, it always starts with your commander, that's for sure, and then also the colors that they're in, I think, to basically, 1, look at what your options are, and 2, look at the ones that are going to synergize best with the strategy of your deck, which I think, for the most part, is going to be dependent on what your commander can do.
Yeah, the strategy of your deck is so important for this. It's like, what types of cards does your deck like? What are the payoffs and synergies that you already have built in? If you're going with conditional cards, how reliably can you meet the conditions on the card? So generally, we like to say you want 25 plus of a card to even consider one of these conditions. So like, if you're in a deck and you have 15 creatures, Guardian Project's probably not a great card in that deck. Whereas if you have 25 plus creatures, Guardian Project all of a sudden becomes a card that's going to draw you enough cards, likely over the course of the game, to make it worth it.
Yeah, if you're playing like a Gitrog monster, then your Oracle of Moldai is going to be way better because you have a ton of lands in that type of deck.
Right.
And those cards will just more often hit than not. And like the best value you can get out of it as well, right? Like if you just get play an Oracle and you only get 1 land, not so bad. If you get 2 lands consistently, then that card is way, way, way better.
I think, too, anything that gets lands as a restrictive card is going to automatically be good in most decks, because if we're saying, like, hey, if you have 25 plus cards of a certain type, it's going to turn that on. Well, all decks have, like, 30 plus lands, right?
Yeah.
So most things that go get lands are going to be good in some way in most decks, because there's very few decks that just like, hey, I only have 15 lands in this deck. Like, that just doesn't really happen. So there are also many cards that we wouldn't even consider to be card draw that can count as card draw in the right deck. We've been avoiding corner cases, but obviously like Brainstorm, which is a cantrip. You're not up cards after you cast it. It does some card selection. But that in a Kess Dissonant Mage deck, which you're going to be able to cast it multiple times, is going to be a lot better. And, maybe even count as card draw in that deck, because the second time you cast it, it's from your graveyard and it's not costing you a card in your hand. Mm-hmm. So now it isn't a cantrip exactly. It's more like a divination. Yeah,
it's good in those top of decks ones. It's good in Narset Enlightened Master when you want to put stuff on top. Also, Brainstorm's really good with fetch lands.
Yep.
And if you have any way to shuffle the top of your deck, then all of the top of the library cards get way better as well.
Cycling, looting, rummaging cards. Obviously, if you're in a Riel the Everwise deck, those become just straight up card draw cards, because for every card you discard, you're going to draw those cards back. Something like Elvish Visionary, which is a 1/1 that just draws 1 card. That's a cantrip, right? I cast a card, I draw a card. We don't call that card draw. But if it's in a rune deck where I'm going to be able to blink it, now all of a sudden it does become card draw. So that's something to think about. I would also think about what type of meta I'm in. So if it's a fast meta, a very highly tuned meta, more competitive decks, then your bursts card draw is going to be a lot better. You're more likely to play the Night's Whispers and the Sign in Blood type effects, and less likely maybe to play the Phyrexian Arenas and stuff, because most of your games don't go as long, and you're not going to get the value from the slower repeatable stuff. Whereas if you're in the more casual metas where the games last a little bit longer, then all of a sudden the repeatable stuff becomes much more efficient. You might not play Night's Whisper, because why would I do that when I can just play Phyrexian Arena, which is going to most of games give me 7 plus cards?
Yeah, this happens a lot. We've seen as well in CEDH in terms of like they have to have very fast, very efficient card draw. So if you're interested to see what, if you're in the fast meta, I would look up a CEDH deck list and see how are they getting card advantage and card draw in this type of game when they don't have the luxury of playing cards like, even Phyrexian Arena, right? Yeah. It's just not that great in CEDH because they don't have the time for it.
And I think that would also tell us there's an assumption, or I think it would be easy to make the assumption, that the CEDH cards that are typically played are always better even in a casual environment, but they're not, because when a game goes longer and it's more drug out, then all of a sudden a lot more cards maybe become better than what's played in CEDH, where they're playing cards out of necessity that are quicker, but not better long term.
Well, like Night's Whisper, great CEDH card, but like sometimes Zendikar Resurgent will just be 20 times more powerful because you can stick it and play the cards and use the extra mana at that point in the game.
And then another thing to think about for all this stuff is the efficiency of the card. So let's imagine a card that doesn't exist.
Okay.
But it's 8 generic mana as an instant to draw 2 cards.
Ooh.
Now let's imagine that another generic card exists, but it's 2 mana as an instant to draw 2 cards. Both those cards are doing the same thing. But one's really good, 2 mana, draw 2 at instant speed, right? And one's really crappy, 8 mana, draw 2 at instant speed. So the amount of mana versus the number of cards you get in the end, the efficiency of the thing really matters a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely like having more efficient stuff in general, especially when you're just worried, right? There's so many times when also in games, like, depending on your mana, depending on the efficiency, you want to play a 2 mana, draw 2, and then play something that you draw from it. Yeah. And a lot of times these sort of like, you don't have the luxury of main phasing a Sphinx's Revelation to draw a bunch of cards. You always want to do it in a way that allows you to take the advantage you get from the card advantage and then capitalize on it. So end step, instant speed, all of that stuff.
I think it's really important to make an honest evaluation when you put the card draw spells potentially in your deck. And this means not a magical Christmas land evaluation, right? You got to think like, how many cards is this card going to draw me?
Likely to draw me, yeah.
Yeah, in your average game under average circumstances. And then compare that to its CMC. DJ, when, this was a couple years ago now, but we were talking about Phyrexian Arena, and he made some really good points about it, which is the fact that, like, how many cards is Phyrexian Arena really likely to draw you in the average game?
To make it worth it, right?
Yeah, is it 5 cards? Is that the average game, or is it really closer to 3, right? Mm-hmm. You play it, your next turn comes around, you draw 1. Your next turn comes around, you draw 1. Your next turn comes around, you draw 1. I mean, that's a long time in a Commander game. And if you played it on turn 6, that's probably the end of the game now, right? And maybe it gets blown up sometimes, and maybe other things happen. And then, of course, there are games where you play it on turn 3 and it lasts multiple turns, 6, 7, 8, 9 turns. But when you average it out for the average game, is Phyrexian Arena a whole lot better than, Ambition's Cost or something, which is 4 mana sorcery, but you draw 3 right now?
Yeah, and you also need to look at, how often are you going to draw these cards? Do you have ways to tutor out your heuristic studies? In decks that can get enchantments onto the battlefield early are obviously a much better case scenario for these as well. So there's a lot of things to factor in, but in general, I think I love Phyrexian Arena, but man, drawing that on turn 8 or 9 is just a dead card at that point.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of decks where it's not that good, and Ambition's Cost or one of these, like even Night's Whisper might just be better a lot of the time than Phyrexian Arena is,
or
because the opportunity cost of having the cards now is actually worth something, right?
Yeah, waiting.
So efficiency and lower CMC isn't everything, though. I think versatility and flexibility can also matter. So there's cards like Abzan Charm, which is card draw and a removal spell at instant speed. So just being able to be like, okay, if something really bad happens, I can kill something with this. But if not, I can draw cards with it. Make the fact that it's 3 CMC, for an instant that draws 2 cards kind of worth it, and a card that we see quite a bit.
Yeah. There's also, Expansion Explosion. Oh, yeah. It can be a fork. It can also just be a card that draws a ton and does damage. So there's a lot going on with that as well. So I think,
but it's not a super efficient card, right? Expansion Explosion is pretty expensive.
It can cost a ton of mana, yeah.
But it's a card you might want to play.
Sometimes you just want to double a spell or counter a counter type thing.
Yeah, because efficiency is not everything.
Yeah, agreed.
Color dependency is the next point.
This is sad.
Yeah, well, but let's face it. Like, if you're in white or red and you're not also in blue or green or black, your options are going to be more limited, and you might have to sort of just take what you can get. Play cards like Mind's Eye, which from efficiency standpoint, we don't generally like.
Dreamstone Hedron, right? Yeah. If you're playing in red, you're going to have tons of mana rocks. So that means, okay, now I can look at the 6 mana rock that draws me cards as something I can reliably cast on turn 4 because I have so much other ramp in this deck just to make up for where I'm lacking.
Yeah. So I think you got to be a little bit careful, because we tend to say like, oh, it's white, it's red. So they just don't have many options. So they're just forced to play these really inefficient card draw spells, which can be bad because white and red are also the colors that have the least access to ramp and don't have extra mana lying around to play inefficient stuff. So yeah, that's a tough thing to kind of balance out and to figure out your deck building for. Let's talk about...
Yeah, time to get more into niche circumstances finally.
Yeah, so what strategies complement card draw the most?
Definitely anytime you are trying to make a game longer or have more control-y aspects to it. So control decks love card draw because you're trying to constantly find the right answer. You have a lot of answers. You need to make sure you have the right ones in your hand. So if you're able to consistently draw cards, I mean, the Phyrexian Arenas in this case are much better in control decks because you're going to probably have another turn because you'll be able to counter the thing that's going to kill you this turn.
Yeah, I think grindy strategies in general, toolbox strategies, like you said, strategies that are looking for the right answer at the right time, and their game plan is more to like stretch the game out, answer a bunch of things, and then eventually win the game sort of in one quick move.
Yeah, just because you have more value, you've been able to grind it out further than everyone else over the course of the game.
But I think our format's pretty unique in that all decks need some amount of card draw in this format. In Modern, in Legacy, in Standard, often there'll be the red deck wins stuff, which has just no card draw in it and is just trying to kill you before people run out of cards and card advantage even matters.
Yeah.
And they're kind of playing this game of like, if I do that, then I'll win. And if there's ever a point where, I haven't killed you yet and I'm out of cards, okay, I'll probably lost that game.
Yeah, there's even, a case to be said that, there are a lot of hand disruption decks in Modern, Thought Seizes and stuff, which is anti-card draw in a way. It's making you lose cards in your hand. And if they don't have ways to catch back up to that value that they've lost, then you're going to take over that game too.
We do have some of that in Commander. I'd say, the Tiny Bones and stuff have come along, but there's definitely less of it. But all decks need card draw in this format. And, well, you had an interesting question when we were sort of, conversing about this episode, Jimmy, which is it possible to have too much card draw?
Yeah, I think at a certain point, if your card draw, you need it. That's why you like the Abzan Charms, to have the flexibility to fill two different slots. It's the same sort of thing. Like if you have a card that fills two slots in your deck, that actually opens up another slot for something else. And not every card can fulfill that. But if you have way too much card draw, then all you're doing is drawing cards, and then you look like a fool when you have nothing on the board but a lot of cards in your hand and nothing to do with it.
Yeah, eventually you have to convert those cards into winning the game in some way. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, there is definitely such a thing as too much card draw. Okay, so card draw is just inevitably, especially on our show, always tied to ramp. Because what do we always say? Every deck needs 10 card draw spells, 10 ramp spells as sort of our rubric. And so I wanted to ask the question, card draw versus ramp, which do you think is more important?
I would almost argue that they're equally important, but you made a really good point on the outline, which is just card draw brings you land drops. Ramp does not bring you card draw. So if you have a lot of card draw, you can find your ramp spell, but if you play all your ramp spells, you're just finding more lands out of your deck. You're not necessarily finding ways for you to catch up. So when we draw opening hands for game nights, I would much rather see a card draw spell in there than a ramp spell, just because I know that card draw is going to, one, smooth out my draws, make sure I hit my land drops, and more likely to find me the Signet on turn 2 or whatever it is.
Yeah, card draw can help you find your ramp. And it also, at some point, does increase your mana because just hitting your land drops every single turn.
Right.
Let's say you have a ton of ramp in your opening hand and I have a ton of card draw in my opening hand. Sure, on turn 4, you're going to be more powerful than me. But on turn 8, is a good chance that you didn't hit some land drops in there, but I hit all of mine and we're equal now on power. I'm ahead and I just have more gas in my hand.
Yeah.
So again, it does kind of maybe... It is determined a little bit by the speed of your mana and things like that. But I think card draw in general is better to have more of than ramp. Like if you over card draw, you're more likely to be in a better position than if you over ramp.
Would you say that some people can adjust it so that's 11 card draw, 9 ramp, depending on the deck?
Yeah, of course. And I think I'm sure you have decks too, where I have 20 ramp cards, 30 card draw cards, whatever, maybe not the same deck, but maybe. Just depending on the deck. Yeah, I definitely have decks that just have tons of one of those categories, for sure.
And again, that's dependent on your meta, your commander, what you're trying to do, and how you're trying to do it.
All right, let's get into an interesting discussion here because, yeah, we laid it out as if it was all pretty much black and white, but it's not. There are a whole bunch of cards where they're really on the fringes, and it's hard to tell whether it's card draw or not. So we're going to go into this last section, which I'm calling card draw or not.
Or not draw.
So we're going to question whether we would count these these cards as card draw when we were building our deck. And the first one is Scroll Rack.
Scroll Rack. So this is an artifact for 2 mana. You pay 1 and tap it to exile any number of cards from your hand face down. Put that many cards from the top of your library into your hand. Then look at the exiled cards and put them back on top of your library in any order. So you basically do a hand swap. You put 5 cards in your hand down, you look at the top 5 cards of your library, and then you make the cards that you put down back on top of your library in any order.
Yeah, you don't look at, you draw the top 5 cards of your library, basically.
Yeah, but you do replace them with the other 5 cards in your hand, so you're not actually technically up on cards.
It's kind of like looting almost.
Yeah, it's a little bit, and it's kind of weird because like Scroll Rack, I've always seen this as like such a powerful card, but boy does it look really bad when you only have 1 card in your hand.
Yeah. It doesn't, yeah, because you can only swap 1 card and then you're going to draw the card that you swap
right, yeah.
next turn. Yeah, it's a little bit worse than a lot of these looting effects too, because you are going to have to draw those cards that you put back down unless you have some sort of shuffle effect. So would you count just base level Scroll Rack by itself, no other synergies, as a card draw card in a deck?
I don't think I would.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Now let's say all of a sudden we change the deck slightly and that deck just happens to have all 10 fetch lands in it.
Oh, wow.
So now you can put cards down and then shuffle your library so you have new cards on top of your deck to Scroll Rack with whatever you've got in your hand. Would you then count it as card draw?
No, I think it's just amazing card selection and card filtering, but it's not card draw because you're never actually ending up additional cards unless you consider that the cards you draw from Scroll Rack might draw you a card draw spell, in which case it just helps you get to more card draw spells. But it by itself, because again you have to play this and then use it, I don't think is card draw.
Yeah, I don't think there's very many circumstances either where I would count Scroll Rack as a card draw spell. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is Tutors. We get asked this a lot. People are like, do I count my Demonic Tutor as a card draw spell? Again,
I think we're both on the same page on this one, is that nah.
Well, the Tutor itself is not, right? Because it's a cantrip, especially Demonic Tutor, which you use a card, you go find a card in your deck and put in your hand. So at the end of the day, or at the end of that turn, you've got the same amount of cards in your hand. Mm-hmm. So you're not up a card, so it doesn't meet that criteria. However, you can tutor for Heuristic Study.
Right.
So it depends on the tutor. I think if the tutor itself can go find a nice efficient card draw spell in your deck,
okay,
then all of a sudden it sort of counts as a duplicate copy of your card draw spells, and it's sort of like Abzan Charm in that sense, where it does sort of count as a card draw spell. It also counts as a board wipe too,
right?
And that's why Tutors are so freaking good. It also counts as a combo piece if you got that in your deck. So I sort of would count Tutors as long as, listen, you can't count a Mystical Tutor as a way to find your Phyrexian Arena because it can't do that.
Yeah.
But
and it puts it on the top of your library, not even into your hand. So
that's another thing to talk about, is the tutors that are card disadvantage, but still they sort of can count as the card draw spells that they can find.
It's almost like going negative into the not a card draw spell, but you find a card draw spell that's so good that it bumps you into the positive into, that was a card draw spell.
I would caution people against being like, okay, I have 6 card draw spells in my deck, but I have 4 tutors, so those tutors kind of count as card draw spells, so I have 10 now.
Definitely not.
Yeah, I would count it like tutors as like a piece of a card draw spell, though, because I do often, like, I'm sure you've done this a million times, because I have. Turn 2, Demonic Tutor, turn 3, play that Heuristic Study that you tutored for.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great play, right? It's just going to set you up so well for the rest of the game. And it's not like game breaking. You didn't go find a combo piece, but at the same time, like, that is often a target that I will go find.
Yeah, that is also, you're paying 2 mana and a card and a card out of your hand for another card that you're going to put out of your hand. So it's you will have to spend a little bit of time for it to get back to parity, or like, you need to draw 2 cards, right, for it to fill in that slot.
Especially if you have Vampiric or something where you actually lose the card because it goes to the top of your library.
Right. Just hope that no one gets rid of it at that point.
But I still think in that case, the tutor kind of was Heuristic Study, right? Like, it just swapped places with it. So
yeah, it's just like a more long-winded way of getting there.
Okay, let's talk about another one, which is interesting. It's Plea for Guidance, which is 5 and a white for a sorcery, and you go find 2 enchantments and put them into your hand. It tutors for 2 cards.
Yeah.
So this is we put this question out to our team to just come up with interesting cards with this, that we were like, is this card draw or not? Plea for Guidance, tutors for 2 cards. So technically, I think you have to call it card draw. If you call Divination card draw.
1 card for 2.
Yeah. At the same time, it's like bad, inefficient card draw if you're counting it as card draw. It's like 6 mana for 2 cards.
Right, but it's 2 of specific cards that you want, so there is power to that.
Yeah, it's not that it's not powerful. I just wouldn't count it as a card draw spell. I'd count it more as a tutor, right?
It seems like it's a tutor, but it does give itself another card. I mean, you're getting 2 for 1, so technically you're drawing more cards and you're getting an advantage there. So
But would you play a 6-mana divination?
I mean, I certainly would.
I don't even play regular divination.
But if it was getting 2 combo pieces or 2 very powerful enchantments, then that is something I could see myself stomaching.
Oh, no, the card you could definitely play.
Right.
But when you're
just
laying
like
out your
6 mana.
deck, do you put the Plea for Guidance in your card draw pile?
No, I would put that into a like combo enabler pile or just
or
like
tutor.
synergy pile, tutor pile, yeah.
All right, let's talk about... Here's some interesting ones.
Oh, this one's really good.
Cultivate / Kodama's Reach. So these are both 2 and a green, and you go find 2 basic lands, put 1 in play tapped and 1 into your hand.
So technically you're drawing 2 cards with Cultivate. One of them immediately goes onto the battlefield, so that's the ramp part of it. And then the other one goes into your hand. Now, if land tax we can consider card draw is Cultivate card draw.
I mean, again, by divination's example...
You're getting 2 cards for 1.
Yep, 1 just happens to go on the battlefield. Now, they can only be lands, so it's restrictive. I don't think it's good card draw, but I guess it would count. I still wouldn't put it in my card draw pile when I'm building the deck, right? I put it in the ramp pile.
Yeah, because your card draw pile, again, like you want your card draw to be able to find you. Like, it's not like it's your card draw is a tutor, but your card draw should say draw any card in your deck, not just lands.
Yeah.
And that I think will help clarify a lot.
However, the fact that it is sort of a rampant growth and +1 mana to draw another card, because we found when we did our statistics, a couple of years ago now, but we found like the winningest cards that were not colorless were Cultivate and Kodama's Reach. Like they were the highest predictor as far as any given card of whether a player would win that game. So they're very, very powerful, but they're not technically card draw. I mean, sorry, they are technically card draw. We just wouldn't count them as that. They're like bad card draw, but they're decent ramp. And that combined kind of makes a good card.
Yep.
All right. This next one's again really interesting.
Alhammar's Archive. So this does not draw you cards specifically, but it does draw you additional cards. So 5-mana artifact. If you would draw a card except the first one you draw in each of your draw steps, draw 2 cards instead.
And there was a new card, Teferi's Ageless Insight, which does basically the same thing.
Yeah.
Do you, when building a deck, do you put this in the card draw pile?
I 100% would put this in the card draw pile because it's consistent. You know it's going to happen every single turn as long as it sticks around. And you're going to get 2 cards instead of 1, so it's kind of got that Phyrexian Arena style.
Yeah, I think in the decks it goes in, I would count it 2. However, I don't put these in just a regular deck that just has regular 10 card draw spells, right?
Yeah.
Like 8 other card draw spells and these 2 cards, I don't think is probably good enough. Your commander needs to draw cards, or you need to have 15 cards that are drawing cards in that deck for these cards to be good, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The deck needs to be abnormally skewed towards card draw before these cards can go in. But at that point, then I would count them because you're very likely to have that other piece.
Yep.
Okay. Teferi's Puzzle Box.
One of Josh's favorite cards. It's a 4-mana artifact. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player puts the cards in their hand on the bottom of their library in order, then draws that many cards. So we're looking like a sort of Winds of Change type thing here, where you're not actually drawing up to a full 7, like a Wheel of Fortune. You're just drawing the same number of cards that you have in your hand.
It's kind of like Scroll Rack, I guess.
Yeah, except they go on the bottom of the library. You may never see them again. I don't think I consider this card draw.
Yeah, I'm not sure on this one. I think you're right, because you're not up cards ever by doing it, unless you have Alhammar's Archive or something like that out. But obviously, that's the Alhammar's Archive drawing you the cards, not the Teferi's Puzzle Box.
And I wonder, like, what are the decks that want to play Teferi's Puzzle Box? Probably the ones that are going to fully maximize the hand disruption or whatever else. So this seems more like a synergy maker.
Or they have a lot of cards that say, when you draw a card, do this, right? Yeah, just a lot of cards that want you to draw cards. Yeah, so in which case I think you're right. It's a synergy maker. It's not a card draw card itself.
Sadly.
All right, the next one is Sylvan Library. This is super interesting. 1 and a green for an enchantment. At the beginning of your draw step, you may draw 2 additional cards. If you do, choose 2 cards in your hand drawn this turn. For each of those cards, pay 4 life or put the card on top of your library.
8 life for 2 cards every upkeep.
You don't have to do it every upkeep because it's only 2 mana. So I would say if you ever... Yeah, sorry, every draw step. I would say if you ever, in the course of the game, think you're going to draw at least 2 additional cards with this card, then it's just Night's Whisper. Mm-hmm. That's still 8 life. I mean, Sylvan Library is often used mostly as a card filterer, but then in emergency situations or near the end of the game, it's like, nope, I'm going to draw both, and then I'm going to draw both the next turn, and that's going to be sort of the NOS I need to sort of finish the race.
I think this counts as card draw.
Yeah.
100%.
I agree.
You get extra cards from it, even though comes at a steep price.
All right, the next one is Path of Discovery. This is the one that any creature ETBs on your end of the battlefield and it explores.
Yeah, so this is one that, again, was in my Kumena deck. The exploring part of it is interesting. Exploring says reveal the top card of your library, put that card into your hand if it's a land. Otherwise, put a +1/+1 counter on the creature, then put the card back or into your graveyard. So very conditional.
Restrictive, too, because the only card you could draw off of this is land, right? So would you call, I guess it's not even Path of Discovery, it's just, is the Explore mechanic some amount of card draw? Since it can get you lands, is it like Oracle?
It's kind of like Coiling Oracle type cards, right?
Oracle of Moldiah?
Yeah. I would say this counts as like 0.5 of a card because so many times it's not going to be what you want. Like, it's not like Thrasios.
I don't even know if it's 0.5. I would count it like, a third of a card draw. But it is some amount of card draw. Would you put it in, like when you built your Kamina deck, did you put this in the card draw pile or just the general synergy pile?
I put this in the synergy pile for sure, just because you wanted to get the +1/+1 counters on certain creatures.
And it's value. You do get some value, but I don't know that I would be like, yep, I've got 9 card draw spells and Path of Discovery, I'm good.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you're running this with a bunch of flashback spells and stuff and you're dumping the cards that you explore with into your graveyard, then I think you can start considering that as card draw because you have access to those cards.
Well, yeah, I think Graveyard Synergy makes this better.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Very interesting.
All right, the next card is Stand Still, which is a blue enchantment. I used to see this a lot. I've seen it less, but it's still a cool card.
Yeah, it's 1 in the blue. Whenever a player casts a spell, sacrifice Stand Still. If you do, each of that player's opponents draws 3 cards.
So you kind of cast this, say go, and then dare anybody to not cast spells. Because if they do, everybody else draws 3 cards.
Yeah, that seems nuts. Now, however, everyone is up 3 cards compared to the person that cast the spell, but you're the person that cast Stand Still, so you're actually only up 2 cards, and your opponents are both up 3.
But one of your opponents is down
Right, 3.
Sort of.
Does
this count as card draw?
Can you miss what you can't have? I think you can consider this card draw because for you are drawing 3 cards for 1. So yes, you're going to come up positive in this regard. However, I think we have to be really careful about card draw when other players at the table are drawing cards. Your card draw gets significantly worse.
Yeah, that's again, it's not a commentary on whether or not it's good card draw. It's just, is it card draw? I don't know if I would count it as card draw.
I mean, 3
it's
cards
also
for 1.
Somewhat conditional in that I have seen Stand Still get cast and nobody does anything. It comes back around to the player's turn that cast it, and they're like,
and then I
don't want to do anything. Yeah, so
that's funny.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that one. The next one is Sunforger. It's 3 mana for an equipment. All right, it's complicated, but I guess I'll just read the whole thing. It's 3 mana to equip. Equip creature gets +4/+0. Here's the important part. You can pay a red and a white and unattach Sunforger, and then you search your library for a red or white instant card with converted mana cost 4 or less and cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then you shuffle your library. So at instant speed, you unattach Sunforger for 2 mana, and you tutor out and cast a white instant or sorcery 4 CMC or less. Sorry, not sorcery. White or red instant only. And then it's 3 more to equip, and it's obviously cost 5 mana to do this. But because it's repeatable, I think the fact that it's a tutor would throw you off, but it is getting you a card every time you do this.
Yeah, and it never touches your hand. You just get straight up cast. But in the same way, it's almost like, now you're paying it for free, right? Now you're just saying that every red or white instant sorcery card that with CMC 4 or less just costs me 5 mana to cast, but I can get it from anywhere.
However, you're building a deck. You're building Firesong and Sunspeaker. Mm-hmm. You're laying out, here's my 10 ramp cards. Here's my 10 card draw cards.
Does this count as...
Is Sunforger put in the card draw category?
It's got... For me, I put this into protection, utility, tutor.
Value,
yeah.
Yeah, it's not efficient enough to count as card draw because you're paying 5 mana for each card drawn. Yeah. So it's good. It's not that it's bad, but I don't think I'd count it as card draw just because it's too efficient to be used. And it also doesn't help you hit your land drops and other things that I want card draw to do. But
yeah. Sunforger I would just call the best Boros tutor.
It's so good. It's the best Boros card, I think. Probably is.
Yeah, it's up there.
All right.
We got Rush Me, Eternity's Crafter. Whenever you cast your first spell each turn, reveal the top card of your library. You may cast it without paying its mana cost. If it's a spell with a lesser converted mana cost, if you don't cast it, put it into your hand. So you may cast it. So every single time you cast a spell each turn, you do get to draw a card if you want. Otherwise, you have the option to cast it. I would consider this a cantrip in a way. Now,
do you consider Guardian Project a cantrip?
Well, I mean, here's the thing: is because you can cast it sometimes. Well,
What about Fathom Mage, which costs 4 mana, and then whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if its power is greater than Fathom Mage's, basically, it evolves. You
get a +1/+1 counter on it.
And then you draw a card?
Yeah.
This is just that, but only once per turn, and sometimes you cast the card for free.
Yeah, and you can do it on each person's turn, so you can get a lot of value off of this, and you don't have to cast it, you can put it into your hand. The only thing that I think of is that you are casting something to get that card every single time, and that...
But that's Guardian Project, Zendikar Resurgent.
It is, but those are like creatures, right? So those are things that need to stick and enter the battlefield. This could be an instant or a sorcery, and it feels more like a cantrip. So I'm interested. I think this, for me, rides the line right in the middle.
I think I've counted this as card draw in decks before, and I think it's very similar to Guardian Project. Obviously, Guardian Project has the upside that you can cast multiple spells in a turn and draw more cards, but turning one category of card into card draw, we generally would count Zendikar Resurgent, Guardian Project. This just says spell. It doesn't even care about category of card. You just cast spells, and you're drawing cards, or sometimes casting them for free. So I would count it.
Okay, we'll count it. Mind's Dilation, one of another Josh Lee Kwai's favorites. Whenever an opponent casts their first spell each turn, that player exiles the top card of their library. If it's a non-land card, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. So this, to me, says card draw because they're the ones casting the spells, and they're the ones giving you access to more of their deck to cast.
It's funny because I don't think I put Mind's Dilation into the card draw category in my decks.
Where does it go into? Them. Just power?
Yeah, it's kind of like Expropriate or something like that, where it's just like very good.
Yeah, 7 mana, again, that's a very high for a quote-unquote card draw spell.
And obviously it's much better if you have Rush Me or Vile Smasher, something that synergizes with first spells you cast each turn and things like that. But I don't know that I count it as card draw, which maybe is wrong. If Stolen Strategy and things like that are card draw, then I don't know. This seems like maybe it would fit. It might also be that the CMC price tag.
CMC price tag, yeah.
Yeah, 7 is just so high that up at that register, I don't count anything that's like... I don't count it exactly as card draw.
At this point, is it card draw or is it end the game ability type stuff, or just like disruption
value?
It's just sort of straight value.
Yeah, it's like its own value engine.
Yeah. Also, do you count it as card draw if you don't know what is going to happen if it's your opponent's decks?
Well, like Stolen Strategy, I would count as card draw, but it might be because it's in mono red and you're often hard up, whereas this is mono blue. And if you actually want card draw, it's not that hard to find.
Yeah. What about this one, Josh?
Okay, Notion Thief is the next one. It's 2 blue and a black. So 4 mana for 3/1 of flash. If an opponent would draw a card except the first one they draw on each of their turns, instead that player skips that draw and you draw a card.
Yeah, this is definitely card draw. I mean, your opponent ideally are going to be doing things to draw more cards than you. You can flash this out, get them, draw a card in their stead.
I mean, it's really good, but do you count as card draw when you're building your deck? Is it one of your 10?
Well, I wouldn't. It's tough because this is a meta call for me. If I knew that everyone was running Consecrated Sphinxes and stuff that draws tons of cards, although I think Consecrated Sphinx just mills you out entirely.
No, you need 2 Consecrated Sphinxes.
Yeah, it's not May ability.
Oh yeah, you're right. It does mill you out because then you go to draw the card.
Yeah,
I'll draw 2. Okay, I'll draw the 2.
Gosh.
So they're like, I'll draw 4. Okay, I'll draw
4. Yeah. I think I would only consider this card draw if I knew everyone in the meta has a lot of just their own card draw, so that this could constantly and consistently be an effect where I'm stealing their card draws.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Commander generally has enough card draw that it probably counts, but I have Notion Thief in a few decks. Obviously, I think most people who have a lot of decks do, but I don't know that I've ever actually counted it as card draw in those decks. I think it's just like good value,
right? Like
strong card, but I don't know that I counted it similar to how I would Rhystic Study or something. Interesting.
What about the Howling Mines and Temple Bells of the world? So Howling Mine is an artifact at the beginning of each player's draw step. If Howling Mine is untapped, that player draws an additional card. And Temple Bell is just tap it and let it draw. Every player draws a card.
Yeah.
They say draw cards on it.
It's interesting because does it change what we consider it to be if it's affecting, if it's what's that symmetrical effect?
Yeah.
If all players are drawing the cards or 2 players are drawing that amount of cards, it's not just you getting ahead of the table. Everybody's kind of staying equal. In fact, you're not really staying equal because Howling Mine, you use the Howling Mine, so you're down a card. And also, Howling Mine is not great because you're the last one to draw a card around the table.
Flash it in, yeah.
At least Temple Bell is, hey, I don't activate it until the end step before my turn, and I'm the first one to use the cards. I definitely have put Howling Mine in decks and counted it as card draw because I don't know what else it could be. But at the same time, does card draw, we talked about that component where you're up cards. Is it just up to yourself? Like I use one card, but I get 2 cards back from it? Or is it up against the table?
I use 1 card. Everyone now is up 3 cards total, and I only get 1 card. So is it card draw? Oh, it's definitely a card advantage sometimes.
But is it card draw without card advantage? Is that like, I don't know. What do you think?
I think this is still card draw. I just don't like it as much because everyone else is getting a card. Same goes for Temple Bell as well. But like you said, you can choose the timing of Temple Bell a little bit better, and that will make a big difference.
Okay, let's talk about, there's 2 more left here, or a few more left here, but I think these last 2 are interesting. So there's a Atali Primal Storm and Narset Enlightened Master. Both are similar in that when you attack, you exile some cards. Atali is off of everybody's library, Narset is off your own, and then you cast them without paying their mana cost. This gives you access to a whole bunch of cards. When it happens, do you count either of these cards as card draw?
It's almost impossible for me to say because you are one for Atali, like it's not your own deck. And
well, yeah, one of them is, right? You get to do your own. Yeah.
Narset is your own deck. I don't know. I feel like yes, because you're getting access to more cards and you can cast them without paying their mana cost, so you're getting a discount, so you're like really being able to cast a lot of things. I think these count as card draw. I think so.
I have put Atali in some decks with red just because I'm really hard up for card draw and been like, this is close enough, right?
Yeah.
But it often doesn't feel like it because it's not very reliable.
Yeah, and you don't know what you're going to flip off your opponent's libraries either.
Yeah, I don't think I would count them as part of my 10 card draw package in a deck.
Not even Narset, that's looking at the top 4 cards of your library and you can cast them immediately?
Well, I don't know. I've never put Narset into a deck. So I've never actually seen Narset in the 99 of a deck.
Do her thing, yeah.
But in theory, maybe.
It's tough. I mean, I think this is like the fascinating part of this question, which is like, at what point does card draw become card draw? And at what point are we just calling it card draw because it fits the divination definition?
Yeah, it's more like it's just value, but it's not actually what we would count as card draw. Okay, these last 2 I think are the most interesting, and you've kind of alluded to it a couple times throughout the episode.
Yeah, so one of them is Wildest Dreams. It's XX green sorcery. Return X target cards from your graveyard to your hand, and then you exile Wildest Dreams. And then Death Denied, which is X black for an instant. Return X target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. Death Denied allows you to choose the creatures. Wildest Dreams just returns X target cards. So Wildest Dreams can take anything. Death Denied has to do creatures.
This is just regrowing stuff from your graveyard back to your hand. And yeah, Death Denied is creatures. Wildest Dreams is any type of card. Are these card draw?
Yes, I think they are. Do you think they're card draw, Josh?
Initially when we started this episode, I was like, well, Death Denied is kind of where the line is, and I don't think that's card draw. Wildest Dreams also. Because, and I don't really know why. And I think, Jake Boss, who's one of our editors here, he kind of said, is it because card draw also has a facet of it adds new pieces to the game so that doesn't really feel like card draw if it's recycling or reusing a piece that was already existing in the game.
I see.
Yeah, but then I started thinking, I was like, well, if we call Guardian Project card draw, there's a hoop you have to jump through for Guardian Project to work. You have to cast a creature. There's a condition. Isn't Death Denied or Wildest Dreams the condition they ask is, did you put stuff into your graveyard?
Is there something for me to fetch out of there?
And that doesn't always have to be stuff that already existed in the game, right? It can be milled or dredged or things like that. So I think that these are card draw spells if Guardian Project is a card draw spell. And the condition is a little bit hard to figure out, but it is just like, have you dumped things into your graveyard or have you been able to fill your graveyard?
Yeah, and I don't think card draw, like for instance, like if you scroll racked 5 cards to the top of your library and then play the divination next turn, does that count as card draw according to Jake's definition? Because you've seen the cards already. It's not new information.
Yeah.
Is a Hermit Druid considered card draw on the right deck if you're running Wildest Dreams? Because you can dump half your deck into your graveyard, and now you have ways. You have a Life from the Loam in there, and like, does that count as card draw?
I mean, I think that might be one of the reasons that Hermit Druid is so good, because it does kind of, when it goes off and mills you 50 cards, it does feel kind of like you drew 50 cards. I mean, not exactly the same, but you definitely got a lot of cards out of that somehow.
Right. Like if we're considering a tutor not to be card draw, however, now that you know what's in your graveyard and you can actually specifically target it with cards like Wildest Dreams and those tutors get them into your hand, do those now count as card draw? Very interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I've changed my definition on these cards that get cards out of your graveyard. If they get multiple cards out of your graveyard, they are card draw as long as you meet a condition, and that condition is pretty easy in Magic these days. Just fill up your graveyard a little bit.
Yeah, I think the big thing here is just asking yourself, sure, we can just put the blanket term card draw on a lot of stuff. It's now determining if it's good or not, if it's efficient or not, and if it works within your deck. Because you can put in all of the cards that we just said were card draw into a deck and just have them not do anything, like we said with Guardian Project and Zendikar Resurgent. So I think card draw, as always, is going to have a little asterisk around it, which is just yes, this is a card that draws cards and you can put it in your deck to do that, but does it actually work well with your deck? Because if it doesn't, then I wouldn't consider it card draw, because now it's inefficient or it's not going to always do the maximum best case scenario.
I think one thing I kept coming back to as we were doing these exercises or these thought exercises was that, to me, the things that go into that 10 card draw category in most of my decks, or for the most part, is stuff that can help me hit land drops. So, Death Denied maybe doesn't cut it, and Wildest Dreams maybe does more so, because I prioritize hitting every land drop so highly in my decks, and I think that's one of the easiest ways to lose games of Commander, is to just miss a land drop.
Yeah.
If you miss your 5th land drop, I don't know what the percentage is, and maybe we can do this when we do our next stats episode.
Probably dips your win percentage.
It's probably 25, 30% less chance to win that game. A very huge dip is my guess if you miss a single land drop before turn 7 or 8. I think up till after that, you can maybe weather the storm, because the difference between 8 and 9 is not that big, but the difference between 6 and 4 is huge, and that's what you're talking about if you miss your 5th land drop. So anyway, I guess I don't know. I don't have anywhere I'm going with that. That's just something I kept coming back to, was it really didn't count a lot of this stuff personally as card draw unless it could help me hit a land drop.
Well, that's going to be a great question to ask you all then, is what do you consider card draw? Is it just the base definition of divination, or in Commander does it need to fulfill a couple more scenarios? And do you have a favorite card draw spell, listeners, that we did not talk about today that you think actually qualifies or teaches us more about this discussion? Because I'm sure there's something out there that we missed.
I'm sure there's a lot of things out there that we missed. All right. If you want to get your hands on any of these awesome card draw spells that we've talked about today, then all you got to do is go to cardkingdom.com/commandzone. That's our affiliate link. If you use that when you order your Magic product, singles, anything at all, Double Masters around the corner. Yep. M21 Zendikar Rising is coming up. There's so much Magic product these days. If you're like us, you're behind. I don't think I've caught up even with M21 yet. So cardkingdom.com/commandzone. That's the place to order those cards. They're going to get them to you the fastest and in the best condition.
Yep, and they have sets, all of them, Ikoria, all the way back to Tempest, right? So you can get all kinds of cards from them. And another way to expand your Magic portfolio is buy the product that you play the Magic cards on. UltraPro, our other sponsor of the show, they make the playmats, they make the sleeves, they make the things that we trust to protect our cards, because our cards have value. We want to play them for a long, long time, and we want to draw more cards over the course of our lifetimes. In order to do that, you got to put them into sleeves. You got to make sure they're shuffled up so that you're not stacking your deck either. UltraPro is the place to go for that. Eclipse sleeves, you'll see them on every game nights. We certainly trust them to do well, and we've been using them for 3+ years now, and they've held up entirely, and I just love not having to worry about re-sleeving my decks. So big thanks to UltraPro for sponsoring the show. If you buy their products, you're also helping us out.
All right, now it's time for the end step, where we talk about something cool outside the world of Magic. I have one.
Okay.
All right, so there's a movie. It's on, what streaming service is it on?
I think it's Hulu.
Hulu?
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's called Palm Springs. It has Andy Samberg in it.
And Christian Milioti, I think is how you pronounce your name.
And it is kind of it's funny. It's a comedy. It's kind of like Groundhog Day. Actually, it's a lot like Groundhog Day, but imagine Groundhog Day, but multiple people got stuck in the time loop.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, but it's funny. It's a good, we're all stuck at home these days, especially if you're in California, because we got re-locked down. And so just running out of things to watch and finding new things to watch is it's like found money, right?
Yeah.
And it's like finding $5 in your pocket.
I've heard great things about this. Yeah. I haven't seen Palm Springs yet.
You haven't seen it yet. Okay.
No.
Well, that's it. I would highly recommend it. I think that it's not like the greatest movie of all time, or anything like that, but it's funny, and it'll definitely keep you occupied for an evening.
Or for the rest of your life, because you're stuck in the same day.
Because you're stuck in the time.
Yeah, you just have to watch Palm Springs.
Do you have a day of your life that if you could choose it, you would ground, that's the day that I would want to get stuck on the time loop?
Man, you know what? I would probably have to say one of the days I went to Comic-Con, and I just couldn't do everything because there's so much happening. So they could always just keep going back and doing more stuff, yeah.
I think I would just choose a day in Hawaii where I just went to the beach and napped.
That's actually pretty nice, too.
That might get old after, the 20,000th time, though.
So would Comic-Con after the 20,000th time, and you're surrounded this time by 20,000 people. Or, 80,000
You'll be like,
people.
I don't care if I ever see a stormtrooper again.
Yeah. That'll be fun.
All right, that's going to do it for our episode. Big thanks to our editing, graphics, and logistics team, which is Craig Blanchett, Ashlyn Rose, Alfred Estaka, Josh Murphy, Jake Boss, Manson Lung, Patrick Non, and Sam Waldo.
Very nice. And of course, big thanks to Geoffrey Palmer for providing the living card animations that start our show and also live behind us here on set. You can find them on Twitter at livingcardsmtg.
All right, everybody. Good luck drawing all those cards.
Don't stop.
Thanks for watching.
I'll see you next time.
Peace.
For further inquiries, send an email to commandcast@rocketjump.com or ask us on Twitter @JFWong and @JoshLeeQuai. See you later, alligator.
Greetings, humans.